Right, this is going to be another episode of the Best Damn League show. So obviously, I am here every week. It is my show, but there isn't any more Dom. We won't make the same joke. We've done it on all the past episodes. But one thing I should do that I actually did neglect to do on the last episode, but is in keeping with my brand and history, is we did have Jensen go on the last episode. I didn't at all introduce him, except I think he said he was a coach, so that's about it. Like, I didn't really give him his plaudits and set up. So basically, if people know, obviously you will have seen Nymera from way back when he first came on Summoning Insight. At the time, it was just for his expertise about the Japanese region, actually the LGL, which if people don't know, I would actually even say he sort of has done kind of the career path that Frostgurren did, where at the time, somewhere like China was sort of like irrelevant / not known in the West, she did sort of like the community broadcast, came up, so did Kelsey Moser, if people don't know. Nymera basically did that on the Japanese broadcast. Then after that, he did like NLC, which is the UK sort of VRL thing, if people don't know, and the EU Masters, etc. And obviously you've seen him as a guest sometimes on LEC, and at the odd moment in Worlds or international tournaments, keyword.
No,
odd.
I haven't done
Worlds yet.
No,
okay.
I haven't done that yet.
Why in my brain do I feel like you've done a plane or something? You've never done any plane at all?
No, maybe I'm just that present when I talk about regions.
Maybe you have just imprinted so that in my brain now it's like I've done that thing where you can you actually can retcon memories. It's like in memory I've just retconned all the DFM games that you were actually casting them as
whenever
well,
anything happened with DFM, I would be the person telling them what happened about DFM anyway. Okay. So by proxy.
Yeah, I see how it works. Okay. So obviously this is an LEC show. If people don't know, Nightmare obviously sometimes guests on the LEC. I would hope one day, if you look at his career path, maybe he could be a permanent member there. If you think about all the different talent that have been on the show. It's also, if people don't know, just the #1 destination because it's English language, obviously, for most casters. Like those stories back in the day are all true. Almost everyone you can think of who hasn't been on could have been on, like Papa Smithy, Atlas, Monty, the Jokers, people like Frostgurren did go, LS, like a million people have had the offer. So anyway, let's start out here, Nymera. Since you actually did go to the studio and you have been around there, obviously a big topic around the LEC is this whole like new charged atmosphere where we're trying to sort of, I would say we're trying to ape some sort of like a European sports culture. If people think about like, especially classically things like La Liga, where if people don't know, I'll just tell this very brief story, but sports fans will know it. The rivalry between Barcelona and Real Madrid isn't just like we're the two best Spanish teams. There's a very famous story where when the iconic Portuguese player Figo went from Barcelona to Real Madrid, in one of his next games, someone threw a pig's severed head at him while he took a corner, and that was in amongst people raining lighters and oh no, my point basically is like it can get really wild in sports. So the reason I bring this up is whenever people go, we should have that atmosphere in esports. I'm like, in a way, I know what you mean, but let's see, let's have some guardrails. You know what I mean? Let's maybe not have like flares go off in the crowds. I want all the upside of it. I want the passion. I want people getting enthused. I want signs and people loving play. I want even some banter. By the way, I even do like the idea you can boo. I like the idea it can be a hostile environment and that can be a cool angle. Maybe a player rises to the challenge and wins against the home crowd, or maybe it does make them break and you see that, they have performance anxiety. That stuff's all great, but obviously the one area I get worried in is, especially because we're not just doing it in person, we're getting a lot of our stuff from text. There can be a dark side to that type of fan culture. So what I want to ask is this. I obviously have only seen it on camera. I've only heard it through the crowd blanks. What actually is it like when they're in studio? I mean, the most famous one is the Blue Wall. It's the Carmine Corp fans. What's it like when that atmosphere is going on, contrasted with the past LEC? Give me some thoughts.
So I was in studio for the last day of week 1, which was Karmine Corp versus Mad Koi, and that is the rivalry right now in LEC. So I probably got the best view of what could happen with it. So I think there is a real upside to it. During that game, both sides of the crowd were really active because of the way that the LEC is arranged too. You have like a flat back of seats, then you have 2 banks of seats which are on the sides, and they're curved. So what that means is that you have broadcast booths around the back of it, and then you have seats in front of it between them and the stage, which also means that the cameras can look through the broadcast, see some of the fans on camera there too. What that means is that you'll have co-streamers like Kometo for the Karmine Corp fans, and then also Ibai for the Mad Koi fans as well. And they will sit in front of their co-streamer booths. So So as the way it was organized here, you had Kometo on, like, if you're looking at the stage, he was on the left-hand side, and then Ibai was on the other side. Their fans were sat in front of each other on the curved seats. They could see each other chanting, and they could see the players as well. So there was a really good atmosphere like that in regards to kind of like the fans being able to interact with each other. I've not really seen that much in the LEC before. I mean, I was in studio in and out of it for work and then as a fan as well since I've been in Berlin.
As far as I know, the only thing from memory that they ever had was, people might remember, like famously Unicorns of Love obviously used to do some sort of weird shenanigans. But that's about it, isn't it? Aside from that, like, which almost
G2 Fnatic sometimes.
Yeah, maybe the odd one. But like, pretty sweet, like you're saying, I mean, the key thing about this particular case is, I mean, we now know, unfortunately, Karmine Corp isn't one of the better teams. So it's actually the other thing that's incredible is you're getting this crazy rivalry over what isn't like any El Clasico. This is just like essentially a regular season match between two teams who probably won't be at Worlds. Like, that's the part that's kind of impressive. It shows they've activated the fan base.
Before this game happened, before that, on the second day of week 1, there was also G2 Karmine Corp. And what happened there was, because we'll talk about some of this when we get to the other anecdotes I've got. Security went over to have a word with the Karmine Corp fans on day 2 because they were getting a little bit annoyed that other teams were cheering at the teams playing against them. So the Mad Koi fans went to the G2 fans and said, hey, we'll cheer with you because fuck Karmine Corp, basically.
Oh, now there's like little like alliances being made in the fans, right? I thought
that. I would say there's an alliance, but basically it's just everyone's cheering against Karmine Corp.
Oh, now, everyone just hates that one fan base,
so
right?
Except now it's getting to the point where the fan bases are actually kind of, again, like setting it up in advance somewhat. And from what I understand, some of the Karmine Corp fans were getting a little bit annoyed at that. So I did hear that like security got involved with them for some interactions they had within the crowd. And then obviously the day after was Karmine Corp against Mad Koi, which is the Spanish-French rivalry and the kind of the streamer personality rivalry as well. During the game, I thought it was great. You had like chance and counter chance. There was a particularly funny moment where I think Super was getting dove multiple times by Bo in bot lane and getting ran down there. So the Mad fans were saying, they were chanting Super's name, saying Super, Super, trying to big him up even though he died. Then what happened was the Karmine Corp fans chanted back Chupa, Chupa, which means suck it in Spanish, which sounds similar enough. So that was kind of funny. It's a bit edgy. I don't mind. That's kind of whatever.
Fair play.
And then things got heated up at the end of the game in a good way, I think, where there was the pentakill and the game ended, and the co-streamers behind the Mad Koi fans. And it's funny you mentioned where are the guardrails and stuff like that. There aren't exactly guardrails between the co-streamers and the actual audience. There's like a bit of a raised wall, but some of the folks in eBuy's booth jumped out of the booth and into the crowd to go celebrate with them, which is... I was sat just by the Mad Koi fans as well. So I thought that was kind of fun because I don't think anyone was caught in between that. So it felt like it was good. No, there was like no third party fans being like that.
No, but the thing is, one point you make there that I actually think is something people probably won't think about is if we are going to contrast it with sports, there's a reason they literally physically separate the sporting fan bases, guys. Like, I mean, look, nowadays, maybe people have got, like, actually, if people don't know, English football's actually not as bad as it once was. There's not really people like, getting beaten up all the time. It's not like how it was. But even so, like, I actually think separating people is also part of why it isn't that bad. Like, if you really, put it this way, I'll give you an example, Naira. When I was a boy, so a long, long time ago now, with the penny farthing and all that, right? When I was a boy and I went to football games, I remember going to one where all I'll say is, let's say a family relative of mine, we weren't fans of the team that we were in the home ground area. We were doing that thing where, you see your team, but when they play for some shitter team, so you can get the tickets, whereas you never would, like, in the real game, So you go into the other side, and obviously they told me, like, in no uncertain terms, do not in any way celebrate if our team scores. Because as a kid, I was just like, what? Why not? It's just fun. It's like, and you just have to realise, like, someone would it would be like that, the vaudeville thing, like that crook would come out and just yank you off stage, it'd be over. So that's one thing I would agree. There's been no issue so far. It has just been vocal stuff, banter. So, but I would just say that's probably what LEC should watch. Be super careful if anything looks like there's any sort of tension in the crowd or people too close, because that's where I get worried, because all you're going to need is one incident to ruin this for everyone.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned that. I have had it confirmed by people who were working on the studio on that day. There were 2 fist fights, apparently. I don't know how big they got. I don't know whether they were small scuffles. I don't know what that means. But the words I heard were, there were 2 fist fights. So that's not me mincing words. That's not my own words. That's someone that was working at the studio. So I think you can already tell that there's like some stuff there. I don't know exactly what that's realistically going to reach towards, though, because I think there's a lot of different psychology which goes between, if you are a struggling team, yes, tensions are going to raise as well. Maybe there's something to that. But then actually, if it was a more important game, like a qualification game, maybe that would also raise things beyond a certain point. It's funny you mentioned, the football stuff too, because I come from a rugby union background, because my dad's side of the family is Welsh. Rugby union is kind of the national sport in Wales.
It's the main sport, yeah. It's basically the only sport there.
Yeah, we had that one Euros in the football, which went okay when we still had, Ramsey and Bale. But that was, that was an okay time. But that's always had mixed seating. So even if you have seats and home seats, that always has mixed seating. So, I've had very fond memories of sitting with, fans of like New Zealand All Blacks and stuff like that. Even though they've been trashing us and gameplay on the field's been a bit weird, it's been a civil atmosphere in the crowd. Okay. So it depends where you're kind of drawing from the kind of the sporting crowd side of it. Because, I think football is the big one where it comes to kind of actually real tribalism. And
if people don't know, by the way, that also does invoke, there's a classic saying, obviously the rugby fans are the ones that say it. There's a very famous saying in England goes, rugby is a sport that looks like it's for hooligans played by gentlemen. But then the joke is that football's supposed to be the sport of gentlemen, but it's played by hooligans, isn't it? Because the joke is, there's actually even a logic to it if people don't understand. It's the same reason why in North America, you'd think because you're allowed to fight in hockey, it must be the most dangerous sport of all time. The joke is people play till they're 40 in that sport because actually the fact you can fight means you have to pick and choose when to do that and you don't do it all the time. Whereas the joke is, in a sport like football where you're not supposed to beat people, you obviously kick fuckers all the time. Every time the ref's not looking, you get some so actually, sadly, there is almost a logic to that. Yeah, I know what you mean.
There's a third line to that as well, which is American football is a hooligan sport played by hooligans. So that's okay. The third line.
Is that the one to unite us all? Is that to bring the football and the rugby fans together? Like, fuck Americans.
That one,
I'm with you. Okay, fair enough.
But right. I think there's a lot to investigate in regards to this is very new to the LEC because we have gone from, in the space of 5 months, having German golf clap, yes, very good kind of behavior. It was really hard to get a rise out of the crowd last year and the year before that. Unless you had some of the more vocal fan bases, like sometimes the G2 Army would turn up or something like that. It's been really hard to get a raise out of the crowd to suddenly Karmine Corp fans being, raising the roof pretty much every game. I think that's a good thing. I think even stuff like the Alioya interview after after Mad Koi beat Karmine Corp, that was pretty good too.
By the way, just a technical note to say, I don't have a problem with people booing. I just think that on the broadcast they had the crowd mic too loud. That's all. Like make it a bit more subdued. The real issue there was you could actually see that he and us on the broadcast sort of couldn't hear the interview. That's the only problem. I actually think it's totally fine. Yeah. Basically, if people don't know, I think LEC probably just got a bit too horny. That, as you say, they're not used to this atmosphere. Whereas, like
and the difference between games is too high as well.
Oh, of course.
Like, the crowd is going to be like up here for the Karmine Corp games, down here for everything else.
Yes, but the point people won't know is when you do like a Counter-Strike event, and obviously you want crowd noise because you want the reaction to the clutch and the win, you have it more subdued though, and you definitely don't put the mic next to the person who chants all the time. You sort of put it in the middle of like a group of people, and then you get that ambient sound in the back. That's what you want. You want the background sound. But like I gave the example on other shows, like you wouldn't actually watch a football match if they had the crowd noise as loud as if you were in like the back of the fucking Bernabeu or whatever. That's for going to the live thing. So as long as they tweak that a little bit, I think it's totally fine. Because I actually, by the way, I agree with Alioya. I thought that actually did give that interview way more stakes.
You were going to remember that interview more than any other interview that happened that week.
Even though, like, positive. The joke is, as you say, because now we know that Karmine Corp isn't even good, that's actually a sort of meaningless game. Like, the joke is that might be, by the end of the split, that might be an interview with the winner of the team that comes 7th of the one that comes 10th. Like, it's like, by the way, let's just segue into that. Obviously, all the talk shows pretty much are obsessively about the Karmine Corp topic because they are this year's Excel or Vitality at the end of last year. These teams that on paper, the joke is, I'd even say the same thing about this lineup now. Every time you look on the Gamepedia, your brain just can't compute that they can be last, that they've lost every game. It's the same with Vitality, it's the same with Excel. Even if, then you learn about like the synergy problems here, or maybe this player has comms. It doesn't matter. You keep looking at the list and you're like, how could they be this bad? So give me your thoughts. And a lot of people have discussed this to death, but what's your angle? What's the Karmine Corp angle for you? Like, is the whole project a bust to you so far?
God, I mean, where do you start with this, right? Because there are multiple different issues. So I did some tier listing stuff before the split started, and I was pretty high on Karmine Corp. Yeah. Maybe that's because I've been a bit more involved with Karmine Corp because I've cast 3 out of the last 4 EMEA Masters finals.
Well, so I do notice, Nymira, a lot of the people who just said they were trash out the gate were just people who never watched ERL. So look, I will admit they've obviously lost every game and looked bad, but like a lot of the people I know, if you actually watched the LFL at all, like there's a lot of reason why people had high hopes for the players that are actually being flamed now, right?
No, there were definitely points in time where I think it was spring of 22, something like that, when that was the reckless Karmine Corp roster, and that team was. It was not a great team. No. But the individuals were so good that they would, even though they'd pretty much always give up first blood. That was the 1-1-3 thing where you just run into the enemy jungle and die. But every single lane would be ahead 30 CS, and they get to 2 items and they win anyway because they were just better players. It was quite clear that many of the Karmine Corp rosters were too good for the LFL, but they were sticking around and not being in the LEC, probably because they didn't want to be lower end LEC. Kabashard has obviously said on Instagram.
It was also implied, by the way, and this I think makes sense. It was maybe even implied, because the stories have been, not just from this last year when they did buy, but actually every time there was a slot available. The story always was maybe Karmine Corp buys it.
Yeah.
I even get the sense it was implied, I would guess primarily to Sackett and Cabo, of like, maybe if you stay, we get an LEC spot anyway in like 2 years, but you're with us, if you know what I mean. I almost got the sense that, like you say, that these guys could have been promoted or gone to teams before. They chose to stay in the LFL.
Cabochard actively chose to not be in the LEC. And I think for their brand, that has been the right choice. You know, if they'd spent like a crap year on a failing roster in the LEC, you wouldn't really care about them. They have a huge fan base behind them now.
Yes.
And in regards to, I think actually, it might have even been Targamas's contracts said basically, if we promote and you're still on the roster, you're coming to LEC. I think there was something in one of the contracts. I can't remember where I heard that from, but it's definitely been mentioned
plausible.
Before.
And I know the org was very high on him and wanted him in when he was available, etc. They thought that they would actually... The funny thing is, obviously now everyone's going to flame him and say shit again, but the joke was, I actually heard behind the scenes, that what they predicted the LFL was what they thought. They said, if we get this guy, I tell you, we'll turn him around, it'll be good again. And he was. He actually was good again.
Yeah, and then that's what makes this LEC showing from Karmine Corp so just disastrous for them, because... I mean, it's going wrong on every possible level. Most of the lanes are failing very early into the game, and there are different reasons for that, but some of it is individual. As soon as they get to their item breakpoints, they're not on the same page. They don't even play for... I made a tweet about this as well, where I was just... Every time you look to late game Karmine Corp, they do nothing. Like, there's no Hail Mary, even though, I mean... You can say that you can look at the players which are behind in the game and say, oh, it's the problem that they're in that position. But then you have to look to the players which are still kind of hanging on. You know, Saken's not been blown out in every laning phase, but he's not making the plays to win the game. And then it kind of falls down to players like Bo to be the one player who's going in and trying to initiate things on their terms. And because you're so far behind, it's a little bit more... I don't even want to call them errors. I'd like to put forced errors on there, like in tennis, right? Where you've been forced into a bad enough position that you're unlikely to make a good play. So yeah, I mean, across the board, it's really not working out well. And this is one of the big problems I have with this whole project, is that when you bring in a guy like Yamato Cannon to coach, one of his strengths historically is getting players on the same page very early in a split. When you've got, you know, very different players, you can still make that function. Maybe after a while, the roster plateaus. I think that's a natural evolution of many rosters. But for them to fail right out of the gate and arguably look like they haven't, you know, particularly improved either, that's a big issue. And there are some very fundamental things going wrong. I think the game against Mad Koi, individual laning phase from Targamas and then from Cabochard were unacceptable for the draft that they had. I think that there are times where Saken's been on, you know, the Nico or the Azir, and he's not made the game-winning plays, which he potentially was in a position to do so. That's unacceptable in a way too. I think you can give, you know, some degree of freedom to, or forgiveness to upset for, you know, problem is if you're playing laning champions with someone who's so struggling in lane like Targamas, well, what do you expect him to do? Yes, he's made mistakes too, don't get me wrong. He hasn't been perfect, but I still think, like, he's not the first person in my targeted sites, you know?
And and in some of these games, he rightfully looks mentally boomed, mate. Like, I see,
for sure.
You know, you're just in a scenario where it doesn't matter.
Do you remember that? There was that point where he walks into Mirwin's Akali top lane. He misses, like, an auto... Like, Mirwin misses, like, 2 or 3 abilities, still kills him, and Upset's just like, well, I shouldn't have walked in there, should I? And then, of course, there's Bo as well, which has been... Bo's been under fire from a lot of the Karmine Corp fans for just being the scapegoat, really, at this point. I actually think he's been making the forced errors, like I've said before. So this team, there is no easy fix. Their laning phase looks crap. Their team fighting doesn't look awesome, too. They had, you know, 1 or 2 okay moments versus G2, but, you know, now looking at G2, there's some question marks about that roster, too, at this point in the split. But Karmine Corp... I don't know what changes you make. I don't know who you put in charge of that. It is an utterly burning ship.
It's funny because obviously, because they've lost every game and beyond the mid game of each game, they just don't, like you say, everything goes wrong, like nothing goes right, basically. And they can lose any position, any comp, any champ. There's another thing, by the way. Here's where you know if you're a real casual. If you think every single game Yamato just drafted the worst draft, you just don't know the fucking game. Like, some of those drafts at the end looked like he's already doing the cynical band-aids, guys. He's trying to give them, like, the most basic, like, there's an ABC comp, and the joke is they're fucking those up too and not playing them out to the conditions.
The biggest one for that is, again, like, I know I'm referencing this a lot, but the Mad Lions Koi game, the draft which Karmine Corp had, you know, that is the draft which T1 would win Worlds with.
Yes.
And it is a very similar meta. You have the Ashe Caitlyn bot lane, which is all about destruction level 1. You roll through the bot side of the map, and then the enemy loses control of either bot lane turret and waves, so they lose too much farm, or the bot side enemy jungle, and their jungler falls out of the game. What happens there is there's just very basic stuff going wrong, where Upset and Targamas stack on each other at level 1. Seriously, go back and watch this if you want to see the proof of it. And they're playing against a Renati who has like a little missile thing which does damage and gives a shield. You should never have both people being hit by that at once. It's a small skill shot and you're both range champions.
Oh, was this the one where like Targamas like sort of like, he's done this a few times. I think he did it against the center as well. He sometimes does this. He'll actually like he gets his teamate by just standing next to them when there's like an like effect. He gets them fucking stunned too or wrecked. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
So then you think, okay, so the whole thing about Ashe support is that you are balanced around having such a crushing advantage after using Hail of Blades and your passive and everything like that level 1 that you get to roll through a dominant laning phase. If you're already stacking to the point where actually you've lost 200 HP more in net terms than you should have done, like, why are you playing this comp? And this is simple. We have seen this for like 5-6 months. It's what won Worlds. It's what's being played in Korea as well. It's being played absolutely everywhere. If you can't play this, you have to go to something different. But if you're playing this style, like, it's as simple as it gets. And then obviously Cabashot as well on the Jax as well just became a lost condition once Mirwin started getting ahead on the Akali as well. So yeah, coming back to the point in regards to, you know, this isn't just bad drafts. There is a level of the players can't play the drafts even if they are the pinnacle of the style that you're going for. And that is a whole different issue. They've tried different drafts beyond that point, and that doesn't seem to have helped. So like, it reminds me a bit of when, I think it was BDS 2022 is the Grabs roster, and it was, like, where I can't remember which split. It might have been Summer or Spring. Either way, but neither of those splits were great. Grabs did an interview, which I think is very telling about the coach's mindset at that point. Of course, Grabs, very well-decorated coach. A lot of people have a very high opinion of him. You need to have something going well to build off of. You tell me what's going well with these Karmine Core games. I don't know what you put as a point for success. This last week, they tried to put Bo on stuff like Lilia and something which has a bit more damaging carries and stuff like that. That didn't work either. He was soloed out, and particularly in the Vitality game, which was super late game and weird, Bo basically had zero impact because every single engage was onto the Lilia. He could never play the game. So they've tried 3 or 4 different styles of compositions. Pretty much every lane has multiple champions tried out at this point. I haven't seen much signs of success anywhere. I really don't envy being in charge of this product. I don't know where you start with this.
Yeah, I know what you mean on that one. I mean, what I would say is this. The main problem is, I'm basically top to bottom, they've got issues. But on the coaching one, the reason I bring up the drafting angle is, look, I don't know if in the offseason Yamato specifically asked for certain players, but beyond that, if I'm assuming he's not the general manager, at the end of the day, guys, the players have to play the game. All he can do is coach them, do the practices, set up the draft. They have to click the buttons after that. And here's the problem I have, is one, like I said at the beginning about the names, what's weird is, actually, if you notice, a lot of the people who hate on Karmine Corp, not like analysts, a lot of the fans are doing that thing where they conflate two things. So understand, analysts are saying it's actually baffling how bad this team is. The hater goes, well, yeah, they're all shit and I knew they'd be terrible. It's like, no. That doesn't make sense. Like, it's not the case, guys. Like, there's a reason why, by the way, people were hyped for this team. Like, I actually asked after this week, Nymira, a bunch of players from other teams and coaches, what was it like before the split? Like, when you were scrimming against this team, were they good? Were they legit? Were they bad like this? Did you think I tell you what, it's a totally mixed bag, Nymira. There are some people who thought maybe they wouldn't be that good, but even they, by the way, said in scrims they were better because they could play a bit looser, and people like Bo really could, by the way, 1v9 the games and just dominate from the beginning.
Then if you watch the in-houses as well, there were in-houses which were streamed a lot, and there were some really good performances from people like Bo too.
Yes, and then other people, some of them actually just straight up said they were really good before the split, and that in the scrims they were playing, this team was looking strong. It's a mixed bag. So as a result, it can't just be, by the way, like everyone knew this team would be shit. No, it actually seems like it depends on who knew about the RLs, who knew about the split, if someone likes Upset, if they like Bo, whatever. But what I would say is this, my biggest problem is, if I had to identify the 2 biggest problems, I actually think they're quite subtle, because I've always thought the problem in League is the real person who gets the blame is either the person who makes the game losing play, which is very rarely the lose. It's just the one that decided the game. It's not really the one that set the whole game up. Or it's the person where they int and die a lot. But I've always thought that's just obvious if that person had a bad game, because you can just see it. The 2 people I actually think are sort of sleeper getting away with it, ironically, because Bo, Upset, and Yamato are drawing all the flack, it's fucking Sakin and Targamas, the fucking golden boys of this like French-speaking community. Because like you say, the problem with Sakin is this, I saw this guy play in the RLs for all those years in this team, and he did not play like this, I'm telling you guys. If you gave him a champion like Azir, he would carry the game. Now, it might be the case, like we pointed out here, maybe our problem we'll find out is that they are actually sort of in no man's land. They're slightly too good for the ERLs, and maybe they're just not quite good enough for LEC. That might end up being the case, but that is not what it looked like in ERLs, guys. He didn't do these things. Oh, yeah. So my problem with him isn't even the idea he's a bad player. It's like you said, mate, I would just describe it like this. He doesn't pull the trigger. He looks like the most nervous player on that team. Because as we're saying, he's getting his champions. Sometimes he has the CS and he has the resources, and he just the key thing is, the joke is, put it this way, I'll make an edgy joke that people in the community will know. It's like he's playing the Ultra Liga because he's just not using fucking abilities. Like, he's just standing there, not doing the ultimate, not doing... You like that one, didn't you? I just slid it in there under the wire on that one. The other guy is Targamas.
Fix that right up.
And the Targamas one is mainly because, I'm with you on this, Nymera. One thing I don't get is, the first band-aid I'd have for this guy is shrink your champion pool, mate. He's trying to pick like he's Keria, but Keria lands those Asha rolls, mate. Keria doesn't stand there and get Youmuushi stunned and CC'd as well. He understands like a true support. You tank her and you get the fuck away from the guy. Like, he's making all these mistakes that, look, people are going to know I'm biased because I do think Upset is fantastically talented. Mate, I don't know how his mental is going to survive if it's like this. Like, there's another thing, lastly, to say about Upset. I'm not going to make it like he's playing awesome. By the way, he looks like he, in some of these games, has quit on the team too, or knew that, like, fuck it, I'm not going in again and trying to do damage.
He's still the second best player on his team.
He's still clearly one of the best factors in the team, one of the ones you'd build around. And I'll just throw this out there. If you want to compare him to other ADCs, look at the last sort of 6 or 7 supports this guy has had. Mate, he has had some nightmare fuel supports. People who just like, that's like the worst split of their career. That's the last split of their career in LEC. He's had people where they were serial inters. Like, he's had some crazy ones. The joke is even fucking Hylissang in this guy for a split. Hylissang, for fuck's sake. So he has had some bad luck. But my problem is this. The last thing I'll say on this one, because like I say, this topic has been talked to death these last 2 weeks. We can go to the other teams. There's more there. But what I would ask you is this. Obviously, right now, there is no obvious answer. Yamato doesn't have the answer. No one knows how to fix it. If I asked you, Nymera, if you could, like, coach this team, is there, like, a cynical approach you would try and take to at least get some wins or to turn it around? Is there something you would emphasize, something you would de-emphasize? What has been the best for them so far? Is there anything that you think has any ray of light?
I think the best they looked was in a bit of the mid game versus G2. I think there was a point where Bo was on Vi. There was a very particular moment which I draw my eyes to, which was there was some really fun in team finding instincts happening right there, where I think it was a fight around bot side of River. You can see both solo laners coming in. You've got a cannon coming from the top side, LeBlanc coming from the bot side. And there was a pick just into the enemy jungle for G2. And then Bo hops over the wall and he's threatening a Vi ult onto the Aphelios. And of course, the Aphelios this game has been very much not been getting too many resources. It's been about the side laners for G2. There's a really quick recognition there of their side laners are coming. We've already threatened the Aphelios to step back, so he can't hit the other people. So Bo's already done enough threat. He peeled back and then managed to buy some more space. So the pincer became just actually a series of like a couple of separated fights where the solo laners of G2 couldn't get anything done. Exhaust goes onto the cannon. He doesn't get anything done. Aphelios is already out of the fight. Bo ults back over the wall, not onto the Aphelios, but pull himself back into position so he's not caught out. And that means that Yike can't reset on the Viego either. There are some moments like that where you think, actually, you know what? There's some really good understanding of positioning, some understanding from Bo not going too deep and peeling back instead, and kind of letting the enemy play into them, which is what G2 have done obviously a lot of. They tend to be the ones making proactive plays. There were some moments like that. I just don't know how you set that up again, because should be the kind of thing which can be replicable because people play into you and you can kind of end up peeling back. Their team fights have been very, very inconsistent though. So it's difficult, really. I don't know, because it's difficult. You're waiting for the team to play into you. I think that you want to take some emphasis off of early laning phase. I don't want to see that again. I think that you want to put in bot lane and top lane as low volatility matchups as possible. I think we've seen enough of that from Cabochard and from Targamas in particular, and that hasn't worked for them. And I think what you want to do after that point is play for one item spikes and let Bo play for the aggressive engages, because around one item spikes on jungle, if you mess it up, you still have enough HP and the enemy doesn't have enough items to just completely one-shot you before like an AD carrier or an Azir or something like that just one-shots you on the way in. So I think that Karmine need to just nail the early game down so there are matchups which aren't moving that much, play for the one item spike and just hope that Bo and Targamas can get to the point where they can get an engage on the one item mark. That's about as good as it gets. But honestly, there is no clean answer. I feel like they could have done this in other games and they haven't. Yes. So I'm looking at this one specific game and saying, let's try and create that lightning in a bottle again without particularly anything, helpful there. I mean, obviously, the other thing here is that you're assuming contractually it's very hard to sub someone out midway through the first split of the year.
Yes, that's also implied politically as well, yeah.
As far as I've heard, because the ERLs are still in the split system between spring and summer, it's unlikely to have good contract negotiations and good contract mobility to get someone out of LEC and up from the ERLs. It's easier after spring split because that does align with with the ERLs. But it's very hard right now this year contractually to get players in and out after winter, as opposed to last year where we actually did see some mobility. I don't know how and why how you pull the trigger contractually on this team. Because that's one of the other things too. You just hope that you can, I don't know, sub in. Maybe someone like Trimby is available for Targamas. I don't know whether they even fit. That'd be something, right? I think that probably Targamas for me would be the first to go. This guy has really, really struggled. But assuming that that's not an option right now, then yeah, I think you've got to just try and remove volatility, wait for one-item team fights where you've sometimes looked good.
Because the saddest thing to me, I'd say, as a final note is, if I even think of the identities of the players, it's the opposite. It actually should make so much sense, this team. Imagine this team fight scenario, Nymera. I have Cabochard on a tank/bruiser peeling. I have Sakan on his beloved Azir, ready to do his Shurima shuffle and with his Sand Soldiers. Bo goes balls deep onto the back line, while Upset just cleans everyone up. Like, I haven't included Targamas there, because actually he's done fucking nothing in the split. But the joke is, that even sounds like some fucking ridiculous band-aid for an LEC team. That wins, right? That wins games. What a world. Because the baddest thing I will say is this. The reason this reminds me way more of the Vitality fall apart last year than it did the XL Super Team. The XL Super Team looked bad at all stages of the game. They would even be behind in most games. This reminds me of Vitality, because Vitality did the same thing. They'd keep getting to the mid game where it's like you're either slightly ahead or a lane's got fed a bit, or it's like an even scenario. And then the stupid thing is like this. You think, well, you've got all these big star players. Surely the team fight's where you're going to shine. And that's the opposite. The team fight is where you blow it every time. And even, like, as you see, lesser teams with lesser players, but who have more coordination, make you look silly and run circles around you. And at the end, the joke is, you can't... This is the most alarming thing, I'll just say as an emphatic point, is I can't just pick one player. I end up looking at almost every player and going, look, it might not be, you might not be first, but we all fucked up this game. Surely this is terrible. Like, that's the other thing. Normally in one of these teams, it's like you have one lane's perma-losing, right? Get rid of that guy or band-aid him. The idea they all fall apart in the mid game, that's really worrying. That makes, put it this way, I'd love to double down and say, fuck you guys, they'll come back, they'll get it back. Right now I can't. They have to at least give me one game. They have to close one game for me, and then I might start to invest belief. Because there's the other thing, mate. I don't care how good you are, if you can't close the game, you're never going to fucking win anything.
The Vitality game is the big one for that, right? Because Vitality game was utterly winnable. It looked like they were against the worst team in... Well, Vitality are weird in that. But in that game, they looked like the second worst team in LEC. They were playing like that. So, where do you pick this up? They had some sitter team fights. There was that one team fight where, VTO teleports away from the rest of the team for some reason.
They fight for some reason.
Anyway. Yeah. And then they, of course, they die because it's a late game.
By the way, that's how bad. Here's how bad. I'll put the fucking real exclamation point. This is how bad, guys, Karmine Corp are. Hylissang tried to int that. That's like he did his... The joke is, like, you would think he was win trading the way he went in there, but it actually worked. That's how stupid Karmine Corp's setup is at the moment. It worked to fight 4v5.
So yeah, you've had, and the thing is, I mean, I'm trying to think of their schedule now as well, because that's the last.
Well, luckily they have played a lot of the top teams, so they might have a slightly easier schedule. The problem is the 3 games left, isn't there?
But they've just given a game over to Vitality. So the other 2 teams which you're now realistically fighting against are Rogue and Giant X, which, I mean, they play against Rogue next week.
Those are the most winnable games. Those are plausible.
Yeah, they are. What else have they got that week? So they've got Rogue, they've got SK, and they've got BDS. So that's one game which I think is winnable. Maybe SK, if you catch them napping, they've had some weird moments. But, like, that's still likely, I would say, at best 1, maybe 2 wins. Which, I mean,
put it this way, we'll get to them later, but even though I'm not the biggest BDS fan, I have to give them props like I did on some of the Insight. I tell you what, mate, right now they would close the game. Like, they actually can macro. Sure. Like, you might not like the players, but they would win against fucking Karmine Corp if they played today. So, unless something levels up, I'm with you. They might lose to they probably will lose to BDS. They might lose to SK, and then we're acting like you're definitely going to beat Rogue, and the others maybe not. You can even lose to these ones too.
I think Rogue, their strength, I think their weakness is their passivity, but their strength is actually, like, in lane. Larson,
they have some strong players.
And Skender are really good. And where have Karmine Corp been weak? Well, actually, early laning phase hasn't been very good. If you are then, my suggestion of, like, just lock down the early game, low volatility, I think you just lose versus Rogue about that, because that's kind of, they will win straight through laning phase, right? So this is looking just so unbelievably wrecked for them. I don't see the path through here. It's got to be like an absolute 0 to 100. And I don't even think they have the players like on, Vitality's had very inconsistent moments. They've had some very lows and very highs. I can't even count them to come exploding back because they've had the opportunities to do that already, folks, and it hasn't shown itself. So for me, this split is a complete wash.
Right, here's what's fun. We'll flip, and it'll sound like we're going to the other end of the table. But as you alluded to, I actually think that whole thing that everyone assumed, which is G2's just going to walk the split and no one will be able to, that has not happened at all, guys. Like, first of all, the Rogue team they lost to clearly isn't even good, but they actually completely got beaten by them. And then they've even had games they've won where they looked a bit sus. Like, mate, I have to say, some of these players have started the year, they've obviously got the crazy name value, but like certain names that everyone was saying were the bang on best, like Caps, fucking Dude Hansama, like these were considered the nailed on best player at their position. They've had some sus games. What do you think?
Oh, hugely so. And in regards to the game that they lost against Rogue as well, which is the only game they've won so far, I was chatting to some of the Rogue folks after that game, and they were saying, oh yeah, we still don't know what we're doing in this match. We're just resetting at the right time, and that's about it. Like, they don't know what they're doing well, folks, and G2 still lost to them. Like, that is insane to me. And yeah, I think before the split started, the one thing I had nailed down is G2 are absolutely the best team.
Yeah,
they looked like they had pretty much best player in every role. Pretty much. I mean,
they're running it back. There's no changes. Yeah, it's awesome.
No changes. Yeah. And yeah, it felt like they had everything ready. And then Mickey, even on interviews, is saying, "Oh, last year I thought, we'll eventually win because we have better X, Y, Z. Now I feel like I'm not worried at all because we're just better individually too." So he had an interview, I think it was on LEC, where he was saying like, "I'm not worried at all. We're just better players." Obviously, that's not quite the case now. I think that there are some fundamentals going wrong for G2. In fact, actually, even against Karmine Corp, there were some moments in the early game where I thought, hang on, this is not looking very good. It felt like G2 are, as opposed to before, it felt like they had all of their waves and lanes and checks, and then they'd start looking for really good fights at that point. Feels like they're going a step or two early. So in the Karmine Corp game, there was a bot lane fight, which they somehow ended up winning 3-2 or something like that. But in that fight, it was effectively Mickey getting a really good engage, but Seiken and Bo are the first ones to the fight. So Caps doesn't have the roam timing. They still commit to it, and luckily they outplayed, because in that case, yes, they were playing better individually in those skirmishes. But they've done that too many times against too many teams now, where they've skipped a step, they've not got their waves in check, and then they don't end up team fighting the way that potentially we would have known them to before. They haven't had the laning adventures we've known them to before as well. It feels like the way that they're looking for fights is just going a step too early right now. And yeah, it's not the G2 we expected to see. I've got particular questions about Caps, actually. I think that Caps has had a couple of moments where it feels like he's been second on the roam. I think that he's been caught out in some weird positions at points too. I think Caps in the past at points has ridden that line between, not quite to the Hylissang level, but that point between, inspiration and then just foolishness as well. Sure. And sometimes that's punished them. And I think we're getting to the point now where, I don't think this is the Caps of old. I think Caps is getting to the point where he's not going to be, one in every other game. He's going to be super carrying the game. I think that the last time we saw Caps on real form was the 22 spring.
Oh, of course, when he dominated the final. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, when they went back into studio with a crowd, and it really just improved him as things went there. I don't think we've seen that Caps for a while. I think that he's been weird in lane. I think that against Rogue, he had some awful engages on the Nico, and he was just completely out of position. We can see some spots of brightness for when the Smoke and Mirrors gameplay comes out. Actually, again, in that Rogue game, you look towards the late game where Rogue have had a huge advantage. G2 try and look for the tricky split push because they had the 6 Void Grubs, the new objective on the map, which helps you push towers. But even then, they couldn't quite make that work. It's not quite as slick as it was before. There's just, if you viewed their their metrics as like a stat board across the board, I would have expected them to be anywhere between an 8 and a 10 out of them. If you take like a point or two off of each of those factors right now, that's actually what we're seeing. And there are many factors to that, I'm sure, because of the changing maps, changing items. I've also heard that they had only 2 or 3 days of preparation before the split started, with like a lot of teams, which is wild to me. Okay. But even then, I would have expected this team individually to just blast all of the others off the stage. That hasn't been the case.
By the way, one thing I want to ask you is this. I actually feel like across his whole career in Europe, Hansama's always had a very weird reputation because people either pick when he's really strong, like that one year in Rogue or obviously back in Misfits, and they go really hard on him and say he's the best, or they just act like he's just like whatever, he's just average. But what's weird to me is I feel like this split especially gives more of an idea of who he is to characterize him, because to me, his problem is this Nymera. It's not that he's like the best EU ADC who happens to have pocket picks like Draven, etc. It's that he's insanely good if he has his picks. Like his Draven and stuff is fucking bonkers. Then he's just got a bunch that are like just above average. Like he has some champions where sometimes he really is someone, by the way, you can say the same about Kazi, where I feel like from draft I know if they're going to have a chance to win the game or not. If they're on the right picks where they have the agency, they can fucking do everything. If you put the Kazi onto a Varus or you put this guy onto certain pick, sometimes they just don't look like they're in the game in the same way. They're not the superstar carry.
So, in particular, I'd put a question mark over Aphelios because there's huge priority on the Aphelios from Hans Sama, and from what I've heard, that's just because he feels comfortable on it. Right. It's not necessarily a meta read or something like that. It's just Hans Sama feels comfortable on Aphelios, we're going to play that. And most of the Aphelios games I've seen is him not getting resources. Most of Aphelios team comps, I prefer to see him in kind of like a death ball with someone like a Milio, and he is the center of the composition.
Remember, guys, since Nymera does watch the LPL is the place for Aphelios, by the way. They fucking know how to use that champion to play around it, yes.
Well, so to the point where LPL started this week, Milio has been first banned every game because that champion breaks Aphelios. It breaks Lucian too, don't get me wrong. We've had a couple of games that today, even as we're recording this, where Lucian just popped off. But if you pick Aphelios with a lane dominant lane, you expect that Aphelios to have 1,000 damage per minute because that's just the nature of those AD carries. The problem with how G2 are playing around the Aphelios is that they're playing it in like 1-3-1 situations where the Aphelios is left on an island in the mid lane. He's susceptible to dives. Right. We've seen, trying to play them not weak side bot, but not prioritized bot. We've seen them sometimes like fall behind in lane. The Karmine Core game, actually most of the times when Karmine Core got close to winning situations was the Aphelios getting caught out or not really doing much. There was one pick around the Baron where Bo gets a really good ult onto Aphelios, and suddenly he's just out of the game. And we've seen multiple games now where he's had just really non-impactful games. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Hans Sama have a bit of a return to form with G2, just reprioritizing what they're doing with the AD carry picks. I still think he's still probably the best AD carry in Europe on his game. It's just you can't allow him to have these non-impactful games. I think the meta read around bot lane for them, particularly right now, is just not it. And I think, Mickey as well, he was clearly MVP last year. He's had some good moments, but because also, the laning phase is a little bit weird because they're playing, Aphelios into Varus against Rogue. Aphelios has always been countered by Varus. This is not an unknown factor. You're locking away Hans Sama's carry potential, and then also Mickey's ability to completely take over a game with engages as well. I'd like to see some more reprioritization of winning bot lanes for G2.
By the way, since you brought it up, obviously a big topic in the West, it's another one of those ones where, when everyone does those debates of is the gap closing and do the people overrate the Asian regions, one of the things I always tell people is, my problem with that is, if you're trying to make it that's just bias from Westerners, or, we want to be like edgy and say like we're almost like the weebs, like, oh, we just know the shit you don't know, like weird Korean stuff. And no, here's how you know that's not the case, because there are always picks, especially between the LPL and the West, where there are some, by the way, that like the LCS doesn't even pick, they can't even play them, but like Europe will try and pick them and then they're just not good. So everyone knows right now, everyone's memeing like, why do they keep picking Lucian? It loses every game in LEC. Yeah, only in LEC, bro. Go to the LPL and LCK, that champion fucking dominates. Like that is one of the the strongest champ. Why do you think this is? Why are the LEC ADCs not getting it done on this champion?
Specifically with Lucian, this is a team thing. There were some great teams to watch about this in spring of last year. I think EDG, when they were playing around Leave, they were really, really good organizing. Lucian, Nami, early push, and then you get that into some early advantage in the bot side jungle. I think the lane is less about that now, but what has been very similar is you set up Lucian plus whatever support, Nami or Milio, one of the two, to just run at you in mid lane at one item. Now, what we've seen with, say, Xkick and DOS, they've picked this lane a lot, and they've had mixed success on it as well. I mean, obviously, Lucian's not won a game this split, but, historically, they've had mixed success. Is when they're going for the, the running them down in mid lane, trying to just, get the extended culling combos and stuff like that, is they don't have enough deep vision. They haven't got the wave set at the right time for someone to be answering somewhere else on the map. To know that your target is isolated and it's a free kill in the mid lane. For me, it's a whole team setup thing, which is why... to go back to the G2 thing, actually, there was an interview with Dylan Falco in one of the playoffs. Remember when they lost with the Pantheon priority in that series, which is super weird? I think there was a series after that when Dylan was interviewed after that, and they said, look, when someone comes to us with a pick, we have to have the systems in place to use that pick. It's not a laning pick or something like that. You have to understand how you use it at each phase in the game. That's what's missing from Europe right now. You can understand sometimes how people will play it late game, sometimes in laning phase, but then there's always going to be a gap in the game somewhere in Europe where this pick just doesn't work. And for me, the Lucian is this one-item spike, which destroys LPL, destroys LCK. I mean, we've seen this incredibly toxic build come up with the double support items and then all of these energized things. There's a really fun combination, by the way, in regards to using the new tech that you have, where you have like effectively a free press the attack on the Sheen support item. Use Milio for a range advantage with his campfire thing. You build a rapid fire cannon to get another range advantage. So suddenly the short range AD carry Lucian dashes forward and taps you for HP from like a full screen away, whilst also like giving you damage up to the rest of your team as well. Insane 1-2 item spike for very cheap items as well. You can understand why they're picking it, but you have to use those power spikes, and you have to have the map set up to do so. So particularly in the Lucian sense, I think that's the case, but it leads to a wider topic of a lot of these picks not being understood at all places of the game and the setup being available for it.
Okay. Right, I think we'll flip over now. I tell you what, I referenced it earlier, but let's just do it. Let's talk about BDS. First of all, nobody had BDS being #1 team in the league after 2 weeks.
I had them at 5th.
That's why I say I have to give up props. And then also, I absolutely thought without Crownie, this team would be one of the teams that collapsed and came like, 8th or something like that. I thought that's the sort of territory they'll be in. Like, they'll be less relevant. Or I can't remember. I'd have to look up the list. Maybe I had them like 7th or something. It was around that area, though. I definitely had them way lower than they are now. The problem I have is this. When I watch this team, like I said, it's actually the opposite of Karmine Corp, funnily enough. Like, almost everyone I'll give props on some level. Like, if some people mad props. Like, I'll tell you what, even though I am obviously incredibly critical of this person, and as a person, I think he's a shitter, I tell you what, Adam has actually played fucking really well so far. And I tell you what, it's not like all these champions, it's not like Worlds guys. Not all of these picks are super meta and super duper good. He's just playing them. He's just forcing them in and he's making it work. Yeah. And that's why one of the other people I always give credit to is the coaching staff of this team. Dude, they so clearly do understand the weaknesses of these players, and sort of they must have some sort of protocols in place as to how they play, because I refuse to believe this is just like solo queue play and just 5 players play and then they do these moves. Like the joke is, Adam on any other team maybe would be alive. He isn't on this team. Somehow they actually make it work. And the thing I'll throw to you is where I want for you to take this up is, this is where when fans think that on Reddit we can just draft without knowing what's going on, we can't, because everyone thinks they know how they draft against Adam. Everyone thinks they'd shut him out. You can tell, dudes, the best teams in the world have tried this now. Something about how they set up, whether he's on the pick that he forces or whether he gets pushed off it, they're just so good at responding, because they obviously know this is the #1 point of attack. And so I want to say, how can they keep getting away with it? But after this many splits, I have to just give it up. I mean, they know what they're doing. They've made this work.
They have, yeah. And, they've looked into some stuff where, Udyr is very, very meta, and the choice counter to Udyr is Darius. And we have one Darius player in Europe. Yes. So, that's that one guy. That really helps. Obviously, the Olaf really good into this kind of, I guess this kind of bruiser half-tank meta in topside, where you have like the K'Sante, Udyr, and, a couple of other champions like that hang around a little bit. Jax as well, right? And the Olaf and the Darius do work quite well into that. But what we're seeing now is that you have to then ban away 2 picks from him to then get value out of it, which then means someone like Nuke can get Neeko, and Neeko's been great. Neeko, he's been great at that. Yeah, it means that Sheo gets something like a Vira Shinzai, which he's actually been doing very well at too. And I think as opposed to in the past where, sometimes Adam would go on to a K'Sante or a Renekton and it wouldn't go so well, I think he's actually shored up those weaknesses a fair amount too. There was the one game where he was on the K'Sante and he was down a whole load of gold. Didn't actually matter. He knew how to impact the map enough too. I think the Rumble's like the one spicy pick in there, but everyone's banning Rumble, so actually that's not a unique problem to you. That's the thing about drafts in general right now. Yes. So even if it was highlighting a specific weakness of yours, because it's part of just the overall meta, it's never actually going to be exposed like that. So that's one really helpful part of it in terms of actually, the champions he has picking, they actually do quite well into the meta right now, and no one wants to put the time into practice those matchups either, which is a whole other conversation. If you know someone's going to be a priority picking this stuff, maybe you should be challenging these matchups.
Like the obvious one that people are going to make fun of Nymeria is obviously the Garen, right? All I'll say is this: have your team pick Garen top lane. See how that goes for them. See if it's as easy as you think. Because by the way, that not only requires him to actually play fairly, like within his limits, but the team especially has to really know how to play around that, or it's going to do nothing.
Oh, yeah. So I do speak with Ebby. Ebby's a friend of mine, and when he came over to Europe, he was saying like, no one else out in my area of the world plays Garen. That was a learning experience, right? Sure. And that's just the case of it. You come from somewhere else, you come from an ERL or whatever, and you come up to this level and you think, well, yeah, I mean, I haven't had to worry about what situations is he strong in that no one else is,
Yes.
I guess the solo queue example is this. If anyone's played against Rengar top lane, it's a nightmare to learn that lane matchup because at level 1 and level 2, he does things which no other champion does. Garen, very similar. If you face check him at the wrong point in time, then he just runs you down and kills you for free. But yeah, I do think that other top laners potentially haven't investigated these matchups to the level which, well, I mean, obviously Adam's going to have the advantage of this because he's going to be playing one side of this matchup every game.
Yes.
You're going to be playing this side of the matchup 1 in every 10 game or 1 in every 9 games or whatever because you're only playing his team once. So there's an efficiency side of this. But yeah, he's really done well. Again, much like we've been saying about, the Lucian picks and some other picks, they have systems to work these champions into the entire game. And he's been practicing this since the RLs when he was on the BDS Academy roster, which they reached a finals of EMEA Masters that I don't think ended up winning that one. He had a Karmine Core victory too as well in EMEA Masters, but particularly on the BDS Academy one, his whole thing was I'm going to pick an obnoxious 1v1 champion and learn how to corral people to my side of the map so the rest of my team can get value, and then hopefully I can get individual laning advantages, but not give them up in a shutdown later into the game. And I think he's matured, since he's come back into the LEC again too. I think he's done a really good job at that, and I think the international experience has done him good too. Where sometimes he got those individual advantages but couldn't capitalize on them. He's brought that back to Europe now, and actually he's doing quite well with that at that regard. In regards to the rest of BDS, what helps him find this really well, though, is the fact that I think that Labrov and Sheo have had a hell of a split so far. Sheo's been a bit more inconsistent, but if you look at Labrov's Blitzcrank games,
it's mental.
This dude is really feeling it. If you look at the difference between, like, this split and, well, hell, even Summer he did well last year, but don't get me wrong. It feels like Labrov is on the form of his career right now. And
it can't just be due to Crownie either, by the way. If anyone thought, Crownie leads... Crownie's not here. He's doing it still. He's bonkers, isn't he?
Absolutely. And, we've seen a couple of different supports in EU try and pick up the Blitzcrank. I think Jun's been pretty good on Fnatic too, right? And he's had some really good individual mechanical moments. I feel like BDS's early game kind of organization where they find themselves into good spots in mid lane, good spots into the enemy jungle as well between Sheo and Labrov. They've allowed Labrov to just, because they've got that so solidly done and they're very confident with that, it allows Labrov to put more of his brain power towards like getting the good hook, getting the good engage. I think that's been a really big point for this team because when you're playing with someone like Ice instead of Crownie as well, the best thing you can do as an AD carry is wait for the other people to make the play and you just use your stats appropriately. It's one of the easiest roles to slot into like that. Now, I think Crownie had the advantage over Ice where he would be the one to actually make the play as the AD carry on something like the Zeri, where he'd get a hop over the wall and he'd manage to get some really good damage like that. Kai'Sa as well. We saw some games in, World's Play-ins and elsewhere where he had some really good value about that. But if you're just playing around AD carry, just a plug-and-play stat stick, this style of play has worked really well for them. So yeah, I think between Sheo and Labrov, don't get me wrong, Sheo's been caught out in the enemy jungle some random times, but on the whole, jungle support's been doing a lot of good work for setting up the other players to wait for the first play to be made, and then someone like Ice or Nuke can then make the follow-up play to make something really happen. Yeah, they've performed well above my expectations for this split. I thought they'd be 5th or so. They are clearly better than that.
Yeah, and I'll also just say, because I think if I phrase it this way, you'll get my point. People know I'm not a big Nuke fan. Like, spoiler, I don't think at the end of LEC, when League of Legends ends and I'm going through that lineage of EU mids of Froggen and Alexage and, the Humanoid, I don't think Nuke's going to be in there. I'm just going to say that now. If it turns out to be wrong, I will say he has improved year on year, so fair play. He's proven me wrong in that sense. But here's the statement I'll give. Here's your flowers. Right now, Nuke is actually a better fucking Eco player than Caps.
Oh, hugely so.
I know that sounds mental, but that's true right now. It just is.
Yeah. And a lot of that is, so I think I brought this up in regards to Genji and Chovy. It's a bit of a weird abstract argument in regards to this. Sometimes your laners can look really good because someone is organizing the map so well that you don't have to worry about other stuff. I think that Sheo and Labrov are helping Nuke in regards to that, but he is still doing his own stunts as well. I think some of the team fight engages he had just the other day on the Nico was getting consistent 4-man ults. I think it was against SK, I think it was, right? Where they ended up beating them. He had some awesome engages at that point. And yeah, I think this guy is consistently now putting in good numbers and putting up to good stuff. He's not been falling apart every other game like even some of our great mid laners. Obviously, Larsen's had some real shockers, but some real great ones. Caps has had 1 or 2 great games, 1 or 2 awful games too. Nuke's probably up there as, one of the most consistent mid laners in Europe. Maybe even the most, actually. He's had some really good games.
By the way, let's do it. At the moment, what I'm trying to do is, in the past, they used to either just go up or down the table. I'm trying to make it like we're keeping people on their toes. We're flipping from good to bad teams. Let's go to a bad one. You referenced them there. Let's talk about Rogue. Because obviously this is one where I will say I didn't hear anyone that I know who's an expert say this team was like going to be good or whatever. Most people think it's fairly humdrum off season. You look at the pieces. like you say, the one upside is, like, look, some of the players have hands, and early in lane, you'd hope they can CS and be out. But the problem I have is this. It used to be a rogue/coin problem anyway, of like what will happen in the mid to late game. This team is like, mate, I don't have any hope for this team. I'm a massive Larssen fan, but I even think, actually, I could even take that as an angle as to why I don't think this team can work. Because one of the worst things, it's why it's very easy for people to shit on really good mage mid laners, is it doesn't look as obvious to a fan if you're up 25 CS after laning phase that you're actually dominating. But if someone's on like an Azir and they're up like that and they haven't been actually that player is very fed. So the problem is it can look like you just did nothing but CS and then lose the game and that's the end of the game. But like I always say, the good thing about Larssen is people like that are a floor raiser. The problem is, I guarantee he got his break last year where people said he was the best in a bad team. He's going to get hated on this year because there's going to be way more games like this where it just looks like you did nothing, even though actually maybe you did do a good laning phase, but you're just not in a position like the point of the Azir there is it doesn't literally 1v9 the game. You have to help, you have to do things. So where are you at on this squad overall? Because the main problem I have is I feel like this is one where I don't think it's much of a surprise that they looked a bit lackluster and they just are lackluster. Like what's the narrative? What's your narrative?
I mean, I guess like the ideal for this team is when you think of the 22 roster, which did end up winning a title, which was, we'll chill early. Jungle and support will maybe do something to kind of like make sure the pressure's not on the lanes. And the lanes will get items and the lanes will just be better than the other laners. And we'll pick champions which work at 1 and 2 items and they'll be better than the other laners. You can't really do that in the current meta. You can't really do that. Well, you couldn't really do that for last meta either, actually, in summer. So I think there's a mismatch with what's happening in terms of just the game itself right now. I think if you look at the priority champions, the grand majority of the ones are ones that can brutalize lane, particularly in bot lane laning phase, sometimes in top lane as well. And then you have to be able to not give up easy dragons if you can help it, or if you are doing so, you're snowballing through the top side of the map and you're getting stuff like grubs. So I think that already when you have Zerlis, who is, he's fine. I think he's actually been okay, but he's not going to crush lane. He's more the kind of person that would chill and then, find an opportunity, but he's not really being the proactive one. You're not going to get like huge advantage through his bot lane. Larssen will farm, but he's not necessarily going to be the person who's going to make the game-breaking play either. I don't know who starts things for this team, even on paper. And I think we've seen that be a big issue coming into mid-game, where you have hit 9 breakpoints now. And that's why I think it's quite telling that... hell, I mean, we could even extend this again back to what we talked about with the G2 Karmine Core game, where I said, actually, Karmine Core looked good when G2 were playing into them, because it's somewhat easier to play into someone. Rogue looked pretty good at playing with G2, making the aggressive plays onto them, and then they got a big enough lead across the map that then they could, snowball through Dragon advantage and stuff like that. If you don't give Rogue easy responses, they don't have options. They really aren't a very inspired team right now. See what I... Yeah, but I think that Larssen, in particular, this last week, I felt he doesn't understand what he's bringing to the team right now either. The Twisted Fate pick was not it. I think that highlighted even more so the proactive issues of this team, where you have a mid lane which has just a go button somewhere on the map, and it went to absolute crap after that point. I think that individually Larssen's had some games which are game losing, where he's given up very early lane pressure. Obviously, the very first game of the split was, for some reason, randomly walking back into the mid lane, trying to greed for 1 mini of CS after he'd just been ganked, gets re-ganked, dies. That stuff is very, very poor. And, again, I've heard that this team had some issues in regards to getting good practice before the first week, and then a new patch came in with a hotfix. I don't particularly care about that again, though. These are fundamental things going through, and to me, that's an excuse. And, while I thought that before, I think Sagenda was pretty good at playing through laning phase and then getting towards one item, maybe getting a side lane advantage. I think that top lane in Europe has gotten to the point where you don't just instantly win through top lane now, particularly through, Photon's looking good, Broken Blade's still okay. I think Oscar Rinnan's had an awesome split so far. Sagenda's not going to be able... He's not like at the top of the list of top laners you're going to rely on to get an individual lead and carry. Larsen's also struggling to...
By the way, on that point, let me ask you about this, though, because on the Sagenda one, I actually would agree. Like, put it this way, here's the best example I would give of how I see, like, the difference in team cohesion and coaching. I actually think if you asked me, like, top Trump style, to give like rankings to the players, my card for Sagenda would probably be better than Adam's card, by the way. The difference is, though, they don't know how to play around Sagenda and ever get any CS lead, any kill. They don't know how to make him win a game. Like, the joke is he's almost like the old meme of Alfari. It's just in lane phase you see shit. After that, it's somewhat of like diminishing returns. So I think it's just an example as well of like, I don't think they know how to play around this guy, mate. It was the same when they brought him in. Because when they brought him in, the whole premise surely was he's not Odoamne. He's not just weak side 24/7. But then it always felt like they default to forcing him into that anyway. I mean, you see it now. He's on K'Sante half the time again. Like, I don't get it, because in this team, if I'm them, like, surely one of my biggest strengths, my solo laners, like, let's get them ahead in lane and make them powerful.
In regards to that too, something which I was hearing is that the introduction of Zoe into this team as well means that they aren't playing towards pressure bot lanes, which means that maybe they can play towards top lane instead. Right. I haven't really seen that though. I think, the last game they played was the versus Mad Koi, which was when Sagenda ended up picking up the Aatrox. That worked pretty well, but again, we've already talked about the TF issues with that one. But yeah, I mean, I think if you are seriously going to play towards this top lane, I haven't seen anything which puts me into particular good spirits about this guy being able to actually carry with a lead. I think that is an issue with most top laners in Europe. I think it's a team-wide thing in regards to organizing side lanes where you can actually get a side laning advantage, which actually breaks the team. I think there are only a couple of teams I'd trust to in Europe to do that. I think.
By the way, how would you explain to someone if they don't watch the LPL? Because I know what you mean. Like, it's been the way for years, actually. Like, obviously, the classic one was the Fiora top. If people don't know, the best LPL top laners are a Fiora. If they get a lead in lane, it's like they're just the raid boss and just fucking win the whole game through them. And the joke is everyone just follows it just does whatever it wants. Like, in Europe, it almost looks like they get the kills and they get the CS in top, and then we still pretend like, right, you're still just like the appeal for the team fight, though. We go back to like a 5v5 or so, or a dragon fight. Like, what would be the contrast? How would an LPL team use the leads that we don't see in LEC? Do you think? What's what part of the paradigm's missing? Do you think?
So, actually, I think we can bring this to a similar kind of point about how the Lucian doesn't work in Europe as well. Sure. Because actually you haven't done the rest of the map setup to make sure that someone is isolated, in that case in mid lane. If you have a carry top laner, what you really want to do is make the enemy top laner feel like they can't stand under their turret if your job is to destroy turrets and get gold through that, or get them to the point where they have to fight with a numbers disadvantage or into a gold disadvantage into this top laner as well. I think a lot of it is about jungle and support, and sometimes mid lane as well, being able to drop like key wards in specific points to know that there is a timing window to get a good trade. I think that one thing you notice in Europe is that top laners with advantages sometimes feel like they have to cover elsewhere on the map. I think this was very apparent in SK versus Fnatic. I think Irrelevant had like a 3k gold lead on the Jax, but what they ended up doing was going towards mid lane to make sure that Fnatic couldn't get a god blitzcrank hook to protect mid lane. Now, I think there was some value in that, and I understand that was a good factor in that game, but if you were a better team, you wouldn't need to call that top lane there. The Jax should still be in a side lane. The people stood in mid lane as well. You
just gamble, right? You gamble, you keep your lead, and then he doesn't die, and then you're ahead. Yeah.
But what happens at that point is that, so in that game, Oscar Rinnan with 3,000 gold down gets 2 side lane inner turrets because Nisqy gets caught out in one wave as well. He gets like a boatload of gold, and that 3,000 gold lead goes to about 700 gold leads to Irrelevant as well. There are some points like this where I think this is partly why Europe doesn't play towards top lane, because actually you slip up once and sometimes a shutdown gold or an extended couple of individual isolated waves can give you a load of gold and XP, can make that top lane advantage feel like you can't play through it. But yeah, I think that on the whole, it's kind of like a team-wide thing to not allow there to be like a single wave or like a moment of pressure lapsing from that top lane. You'll notice that, someone like, so there was the EDG RNG match, which we saw earlier this week in the LPL. Arla in game 1 of that series gets on the Jax, and every time something is happening, he is in a position of pushing a wave, getting pressure, and as soon as then the enemy top laner has to respond, then he feels like he can go elsewhere. I feel like in Europe, we're not very good at kind of like maintaining consistent pressure, so top laner never has to lose value because he thinks he could actually be getting 1v3'd. He could be, like losing waves and stuff like that because he feels like he has to back off. So it's a harder way to play the game because you have to have a lot of factors in check, but Europe just isn't practiced at this really, because I think there's almost a mentality of it's kind of hard to play towards this. Let's go towards something more consistent about an AD carry being fair. Yes. Odoamne's talked about this in interviews too, where he says that, look, I know that top lane is strong. I wish that I could play carries, but my team isn't good enough at that yet. I think that Europe as a whole suffers from that issue.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's just never been a region that played around the tops is the stupid thing. That's why even
Irrelevant and Oscar Rinnan are impressing me though. I think I've got eyes on them, but not completely there. But they're not doing bad.
But even then, the joke is like unless it's Jax, they still just tell Irrelevant, onto the tank you go. And the joke is right now, by the way, let's switch to SK, because I'll tell you what, I've pointed this out before the season. I actually think the Irrelevant guy is actually still a sleeper, mate. Like, I can't believe he isn't on one of the actual top teams. He looked mega to me last year, mate. Like, to me, this is the obvious player where if you don't just treat him like he is just a fucking tank player, he has mad depth to his game. He looks really consistent as well. Like, as much as people are granting it all to Nisqy, this guy looks fucking great in that team too, mate.
I can't remember if it was his debut split or the one after that. You know, this dude's had splits where he's had the most solo kills in the LEC.
Yes.
And not many people will like...
No, that's not how he's characterized, right? Yeah, of course.
So, and I get that he's not always had the most flashy champion pool. You know, there was one split where he was just on Sejuani, and he's had a lot of Gnar games.
Sion and all that shit, of course.
Yeah. And so, like, he's not really given the flashy stuff. But this guy is consistently putting up numbers. And I think... it's helped with the style which SK is playing right now, and I think that ISMA is really unlocking him too. The SK Fnatic game, we already mentioned in regards to how maybe in the mid game, his individual advantage wasn't used ideally. I get that it won the game and it stopped the Blitzcrank hooks coming in mid game because he just was hovering around there. But in the early game, they absolutely destroyed the Jax Renekton matchup. I think that SK on the whole have they have a certain formula which they've gone towards in their wins right now, which is typically 3 dominant early lanes with an invading jungler. We talked about that a bit with the Karmine Core Mad Lions game as well, and it's a very T1 style. We've seen this style be very good in the meta of League of Legends for the last however many patches at this point. And because ISMA is a very good early game jungler as well, he came from the same team that Super and Alvaro came from, Movistar Riders in the ERLs. This guy has very good experience within the last kind of like phase of his pro career as well, of blowing open early games, having Irrelevant just fist fight top lane and actually use some of that mechanical strength, knowing that his other lanes are pushing and that ISMA will either get vision of the enemy jungler or come towards top lane, has allowed him to just put the accelerator down to the floor. I think that's really helped. I am interested to see what happens because we've seen this a couple of times now where they haven't managed to get all 3 lanes in order before they make these kind of plays, and sometimes they get shut down a little bit and they can't get rolling to that degree. But I mean, honestly, if Irrelevant has like a free run at his laning phase, we're seeing how good this guy is in an individual situation. And on the whole, he's translated that well too, which has been the issue of some of our other top laners in the last year or so of LEC. Last year was not great for top lane.
Yes.
But honestly, I think that right now Irrelevant is looking like, well, I think he's looking like the best top laner in Europe on his game and one of the best players in the whole damn league, actually, which I did not expect coming into this. I thought he was good, but
yes.
The current style of play which SK have had has really unlocked this guy.
Because what's weird is, to me, the SK roster was like, oh, I think this will actually be a bit underrated, but it's more like, I think, you know, they'll be like an outside team. Dude, they actually look for real. Like, if this team can actually keep up some of the things they've done so far, they could be like the 3rd or 4th best team in Europe, like, for real. Because here's the part I couldn't have known about Nymeria. Since I don't watch the fucking LVP, I have no idea who ISMA is, right? And in general, like, I saw Movistar Rise in that EU Masters file, but I'm not expecting these to be top players. Like, that's why, if you don't know, people are obviously crediting Nisqy as the usual, like, jungler whisperer. But first of all, the ISMA guys played way above the level I expected. And then the difference is, when he's then playing like that, suddenly this team is way better than you think even on paper. Think about it. Irrelevant, like we're saying, is mega. He's sort of like a sleeper, maybe best top laner in Europe. It's definitely more stable while being good. Nisqy, obviously, people know is going to make players have intangibles outside the game. Oh, great captain figure, by the way. Exakick, if you put him on the right champion in a team fight, you know this from last year, will carry the fuck out of the game and have like 10 kills. So you look at the squad, like, this is actually like a pretty canny squad. Like, they can win in a bunch of different ways. And as you say, they've got their style. That's the other thing, mate. They're one of the teams that's come out of the gate knowing how they want to play the game.
Which is now an extra stick in the craw of Karmine Core. Because if you look at Mad Core,
I like the way everything good about everyone else just refers to how shit Karmine is.
Just because they have the bot lane and the mid lane of the ERL team, and they're looking pretty good, actually. You have SK, which has brought up this jungler, again, the team which Karmine Core beat in the finals. Yes. They have managed to stick to their style, be coherent, and enable their players to play towards their strengths. And they haven't managed to do that. I think actually SK for a couple of years in a row now have found pretty good ways of bringing people and inducting them into the roster. I think there was a lot of criticism for SK when they brought up Exakick, but DOS instead of Treats.
Yes.
I think that actually this has worked out very well for them. And, you know, I think you are going to get capped at a certain point when you bring up rookies who aren't as versatile, because then you kind of have to play for their confidence and play for their strength right then. And then you have to bleed out into other areas and hope that they can develop as things go along. But as it stands right now, SK, they found an identity. It feels like their lanes are working really well to give ISMA aggressive options. I don't think ISMA will be looking as good if his lanes were failing and stuff like that. Obviously, that's a whole thing with the jungler, right? But he has been able to slot very much into his ERL identity of early plays, early invades, early dives, get something rolling. And his lanes have really supported him doing that. So honestly, full credit to SK for multiple years now actually being sleeper, really good at inducting people into the team. I think that's something which isn't talked about enough, partly because, SK haven't necessarily had the results. They're not necessarily the most marketable team. I think this team actually deserves a lot of props for LEC. I mean, on an org side too, SK's been one of the more solvent ones out of just any of them.
Oh, they've killed it. If people don't know, the min-maxing they've done in the market is very impressive, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know who's at the top of this making the decisions, but it's been very savvy, actually. And there have been some things which I've questioned. I'm like, okay, why are you letting go of Treats? He looked like the best part of that SK roster. And now, of course, you bring in...
people would have criticised them for letting Marcoon go and bringing the RL junk. The joke is that guy looks better than Marcoon right now.
Absolutely.
Actually does, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they've managed to measure up these pieces and get a team that's on the same page. One of the other criticisms of Europe I've had is that it feels like team building and general management has just gone down the toilet because people are just building rosters with certain names. They're not on the same page. This one has somehow actually put together a good squad. I'm interested to see what happens if there's a big meta shift and you're not allowed to play this style anymore, or if teams can find ways to draft them into more losing lanes so ISMA doesn't have as much freedom. There's some worries there. But, this team it's already gone beyond what I expected.
Right, let's flip over again. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to Giant X. Now, beyond the name, which obviously is silly and everyone's laughed at, etc. The other problem is this team in some ways has inherited the XL moniker of the bad one, obviously. Like, people hoped, obviously, it would be similar to the one from the season finals, and that it'd look good in the summer, and like it'd actually be like a quality side. I think actually it's another lineup I feel like a lot of the analysts were out on it after the offseason. I've never heard anyone putting this team high up, right? I have to say, it's another one where I think it sort of fits like the Rogue one. It kind of has played out like that. Like, I don't think there's any reason. I don't think anyone's being unfair by suggesting it's not a top team. They look a bit shaky, right?
Well, I was speaking to a couple of teams in the off-season, just trying to get a picture of this team as well. And I remember speaking to one team and they're saying, I was looking at my calendar and we had like Karmine Corp, we had G2, and then GX. Who the hell are GX? And people didn't even know that they changed team names and stuff like that. And then they go into series against them. They were absolutely blasting scrims. Apparently, Giant X were the best scrim team in scrims, which is why some people had them like really high up.
Wow.
Jackie's was meant to be some really good laning, playmaking player too, and we've seen shades of that on the main stage, but. I never put too much value into that because it was a fresh roster again, and things just appear very differently on stage when you have rookies as well. I feel like this team. I feel like this team has tried to put a lot of emphasis on getting Jackie's into a comfortable position to play make in side lanes and in team fights, and I think he's done okay with that. I think that Ignar has had some issues in lane. I think that has held Patrick back a little bit too, even though Ignar's been looking for the big playmakers. And Odoamne sadly feels like he's in a very similar position where he's had on different rosters too. There are too many fires on the rest of the bits of the map for Odoamne to really be Odoamne. I think all of these small things are just bring them down. It's somewhat similar to the Rogue thing, except I think they're slightly more proactive. They're just less successful in the proactive plays that they're making.
Yeah, by the way, as someone who's known Odoamne, not only personally, but I've obviously watched his entire career in LEC, one of the problems he has is this. This is actually why, in my opinion, when he gets onto not as good rosters, people forget about him for a while. And by the way, the joke is he spent half his career in the irrelevant position. Maybe he was secretly the best, but then no one thought it because he wasn't playing the carries. So basically, when he's in these positions, people always go, he's not good, and look at the team record. But actually, he's the type of player who will always look worse on a bad team because, by the way, this is not the guy like a Karmine Corp player who sees that the team fight's going to be lost and goes, I'll just back out and keep my KD. He'll always go in and die. He's just that player. He really doesn't give a fuck about like how he looks if it means he thinks he can win the game. And the problem with that type of player is you will go down with the ship and you might look fucking bad because I'm with you. He's not the problem in this team, mate. There's no issue there at all. Like the Jackie's guy is obviously still a rookie. Fair enough, up and down. Not the player I would have signed. There was rumours, by the way, maybe this team could have had Larson. I know they were out there in the market. The big problem I have is this. It's actually the Ignar one, Nymera. Like, first of all, look, I was never a fan of Peach anyway. I don't know why they kept him, but that's neither here nor there.
Do you know why they kept him?
Go on, give me an angle.
Do you know why they picked him up?
No.
Because when they picked this guy up, XL had a mathematical model which showed that Peach was the most successful player on the free agent market.
I will say, if people don't know, there are actually tools now, like you're saying, that can like compare all world stats, basically. And the idea is,
as far as I'm aware, that this guy was like the highest in those metrics from UOL and stuff like that.
Right.
And this is
It's never made it to LEC, has it? It's never made it to LEC, has it? I don't get it, mate. Yeah, so that one's a weird one. And I've also never found anyone in the scene, at least who watches him on the LEC level, who like tells me, oh, no, you're missing something, he's secretly sick. I think everyone's just sort of like, what does he really do? Like, I'll give him credit. He doesn't just make crazy game-losing plays, but he just doesn't do anything to me sometimes.
He's fine. He's fine. I just don't think he's a kind of team. I don't think he's someone that you build a team around.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, on the Ignar side of things too, is that when you have supports are always going to look worse when their jungler's suffering too, because jungle support are just intrinsically intertwined. I also think that Ignar's had some issues in laning phase, but when they're looking for plays, like I said, it's just very imprecise. Ignar's had some pretty shocking games at points.
Which is bad, because this is the part... I actually, by the way, wasn't super hyped when I heard this guy's coming back to Europe, because I remember... The joke is, he is the meme of what you all pretend Hylissang is. You know, Hylissang has problems in certain metas on enchanters, but then people go, he can only play the hook chat. Like, first of all, that's not true. Like, in the best Hylissang splits, he can play some other stuff as well. Ignar really is the engage-only guy, I'm telling you. Like, you can see that when he has to play some of the fucking enchanters, it's sad. It's fucking sad for him. It's sad for the team. And I'm with you, Nightmare. The one thing I bring you in for, if you're Ignar, is to land motherfucking hooks and to make plays. If you don't do that for real, we may as well get an ERL support. Like, that's the problem, bro.
and we're not going to count the Senna game because it was against...
No, of course not.
Because it's like, it's whatever.
Yes.
And just one last hit on the Odoamne point as well, because I think if you want to look towards other top laners, which we have very high opinions of, who are now in awkward situations, 369 just moved over to top esports.
Sure.
369 was probably the best person enabling carries in the world last year. He had a pretty shocking series, or it looked like a shocking series, versus BLG in his first LPL games. And that's partly just because his carries just aren't doing the same value. If you're playing someone like Odoamne that's playing... I mean, the way he plays Cannon is more to buy space. And yes, it will be a big kind of team fight all in the right situations, but he's there to buy space, really. And when he's playing tanks, he's there to make sure that his carries can do work. If your carries aren't really performing, he's not going to look good, because that's what his playstyle is based around. It's pretty simple in terms of the logic there. So, yeah, I mean... I think their proactive playmaking is looking a bit weird. I think that the carries are very inconsistent. Maybe they'll build through the year like XL lineups have done before, but you're kind of hoping that Patrick and Jackie's can get much more teamfight impact, so then Odoamne can really perform his role better.
Right, obviously, it's usually quite controversial to talk about Fnatic, but the irony of all this national stuff coming in, the fact they've kept mostly the same team and done sort of like...
Good old Fnatic.
done what people think's kind of maybe a side grade or a mild downgrade at support. I actually think a lot of people aren't that hyped, even though actually they're doing pretty well at the outset. What are your thoughts on Fnatic initially? I was kind of down on this team, mate.
I mean, before the split started, I thought they'd be top 3, top 2 team, because I wasn't... That's more of a statement on the rest of the league rather than them. I think what we've seen about Fnatic is quite similar to what we've known before. They are a team of very good individuals on their game. I think that Razork on the right day is maybe the best player in Europe. This guy's insane at peak. Humanoid has turned it on early. He's not, regular season, early year Humanoid. He's picking out different champions. He's playing like, the Hui in mid lane and doing really well with that. His Akali game against Karmine Corp was also pretty fun. I mean, he was just full sending. It was hilarious. Yes, he died a lot, but man, I love that guy when he just stops giving a damn. And I think the really big thing for me, actually, with this roster is Oscarinin has been fantastic. This he's had like one game where he got shut down by SK, but even then, after being put into a bad position because of excellent jungle pathing by Isma, don't get me wrong, he had fantastic team fight impact. He's had great understanding of where he can be on side lanes in a way that we were saying, actually, Europe doesn't have a great understanding of that. I think Oscarinin is a bit of an anomaly in that regard, too. He's been very, very good at transferring those advantages into team fights as well. He's had some excellent K'Sante games where he's managed to drag someone out of the fight who could have threatened his carries at that point, too. We're seeing a lot of very good individual performances from this team. And, the bot lane is fine. I don't think they're going to be... I don't think they're the core of the success of this team, but Jun's been playing some fun Blitzcrank games, and he's made the plays when he's needed to. But the top side of the map on an individual level is playing very, very well for the start of a season, and I think that's why they've maybe gone above people's expectations, but just because the relative form of these players has been higher than I expected.
Yeah, the problem I have basically is they are better than I thought. But what's funny is the main reason I didn't give them credit to be a contender is also I still think present, which is I can't look at this roster and not think to myself, another year of Razork Humanoid. Really? Yeah. Another? Because the joke is, they've been the same the whole time they've been there. Even now, when they have a great game, it's almost never at the same time. It's either Razork carry game, or it is the Humanoid go crazy, mechanics sick, but then that's the one we're missing Razork. So weirdly, they never ever do connect, even when the team wins. So that's already a concern. Then I'm with you, actually. Top's actually overplayed. I actually was worried because people forget what made Fnatic look good as they ran into Worlds. Just having Wonder come back and fucking can do 16-hour days so he could get them into that final. Like, when they went back to Oscar, we don't know how he would have played in some of those scenarios. So I was wondering, well, actually, he does look like split on split. It's getting together. He's getting a lot more consistent. I'm even with you. I can forgive, like, the 1.5 bad games he had. Like, whatever. The rest of them were good, especially in a team that does have, I think, synergy issues on the top side of the map. And then the bot lane, here's the one concern I have is this, though. I essentially think most players in the team are either individually good or above average. But I'm with you. The bot lane's the one that kills me a bit, though, because when I heard the story that supposedly Noah specifically asked for the Jun guy, like, obviously maybe they scrimmed in Korea, or I'm going to guess
the opposite, actually.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because I heard that Noah asked specifically for an English-speaking support.
Oh, fair enough.
He didn't have to be speaking Korean so he could learn English better. That could have been at one point in the off-season. Maybe it was said, no, we're getting a Korean support.
I might just misremember it. It's not something I've set in my mind, but okay. Yeah.
But I seem to remember, actually, Noah said, I want an English-speaking support, so I don't have to... I mean, the key thing on this, the key example would be someone like Piglet, right, who never really integrated with English, even though he was a great individual AD carry at points in his career. Noah specifically said, I don't want to be sat here speaking Korean. Get me an English-speaking support. No, I think they've been fine anyway, but that was an interesting revelation after they picked up Jun.
Yeah, but that's my concern, though, because to me, if you're going to go like the bot lane is full Korean and can talk in Korean, then they better be the best bot lane, because we're giving up speaking fucking English in a team where the jungler and mid already look like they don't talk to each other in any language, including the game of League of Legends. Like, so to me, the real problem is this. They're just too disparate. Like, I actually do think, fair play, maybe the strength of the roster is better than I thought, but in terms of actually, essentially, I'll say it this way. I do think the floor looks awesome for this team. Right now, it looks like they can't be a bottom half of the table team. They're going to permanently be top half. The problem I have is this, essentially, Nightmare. I don't know how it comes together to win. Like, I don't know how you win LEC. And by the way, I'm just going to put this out there. I won't blame them, but I don't want this team to go international. I think they would get picked apart, mate.
But that's the question of who would.
I mean, obviously the problem is if everyone else is worse, I have to send them. But it's like the Mad Lions example. I always said the reason Mad Lions got flamed at MSI is they weren't even supposed to be there. They were supposed to be like our fourth best roster. So the real problem is they got boosted to second, and then we all made fun of them. So even though I won't blame them, if they go, they go. Right now, I just wouldn't want this to be one of my 3 Worlds teams, for example.
But that's just my big worry about Europe, is that I just don't... I mean, with G2 particularly looking very mortal, and they need to get... I'm sure they'll get their shit together in some degree, but like, I don't think there's any European roster I think is going to be really international threat at this point. Might be ones which will be okay, serviceable.
By the way, would you say in general, I don't know where you're at on this, I feel like also the split's been really messy, mate. Like, it's actually the reason why in the first week I was so impressed with SK. They looked quite clean, actually.
Oh,
dude, everyone looks... Everyone, like, basically the only teams I'll give any credit for, like, is maybe like SK and BDS, that's it. Everyone else looks messy as fuck, mate. Even the teams that win.
Oh, that's a big point. And there's been a really big annoyance for me about LEC this year, actually, which is the difference between week 1 and week 2 after we saw LCK start. Can you not do your own research and development? Do you have
they just copied everything?
Did you just have to see what Chovy's doing or something like that? It really annoys me.
Yeah.
Coming back to LPL, at least I'm seeing them playing different stuff. Like, they're not copying the LCK. I look at LEC and I'm like, guys, you are professional players with professional coaches and professional analysts. You can figure this stuff out yourself. And when Europe was at its best in 2019 and 2018, it felt like, well, hell, even you could look back to when was the Vitality Worlds run? Was that 2018 as well, or was that
2018? The one with Yamato,
yeah. You look back to those. Largely, Europe has done best internationally when it's just done its own damn thing. Yes. And it's innovated its own style. And I get that can be very difficult at points too, but it feels like everyone is trying to put in the most efficient effort to copy things and just make sure that half of the R&D is already done. I think the difference between week 1 and week 2 is absolutely astounding because people just waited to see what Korea was playing. There was some champions just didn't show up in week 1, we showed up in week 2.
Yes.
Seen a hell of a lot of Corki show up now in 14.1b and whatever. And I think the first week partly was very messy because teams didn't have the data anywhere else to go look at it.
Yes.
We didn't have teams go boot camp in Korea, I'm pretty sure, as well.
No, I don't
Sometimes
think so.
people have done that in preseasons as well. I think that part of the reason things are messy is that Europe has struggled to really innovate on its own. I think that, God, has anyone really done that? I mean, I was hearing in scrims that some teams were playing like 380 carries across different lanes and they were trying some different stuff out because some of their players were proficient in it. We haven't seen that hit stage. And at the end of the day, I don't really care if it's in scrims and it's not on stage because you got to show you're confident enough to play that in the matches that matter. That was a big, real annoyance of me because I want Europe to do well. I want them to be competitive. But if you're just going to imitate greatness, all you are going to be is an imitation of greatness. You have to innovate somewhere. I don't particularly care if you're not bringing this fun stuff you're doing in scrims on stage.
Yes. And by the way, even though I know one of the banes of my existence in League of Legends is, because if people don't know, in my native game of Counter-Strike, I think people actually did learn the lesson I've tried to get through to League people, which you're talking about, which is don't copy the best team style, because you're not only will you always be a worse copy of them, you might not even have the personnel or know how to make it work, so it actually just won't work for you. So I've always thought you play to your strengths, to your personnel. So even though I know there's a lot of global meta thinking in League, here's the phrase I want all LEC coaches to learn. You know, when your support comes to you and he's just finished watching LCK and he's found the angle where you're going to pick him the carrier champion. It's a simple phrase. You just say to them, you're not carrier. And then that's the end of the conversation. You can go back to playing normal sports. Why are they doing this, dude? Like, because the problem with that one is, to me, what makes carrier exceptional is even some of the LCK supports can't do what he's doing and on the picks he's doing. So if they can't do it, bro, you ERL guy who just got promoted to LCK, if you can make it work, you're a genius. But I don't think it's going to be you if I TS.
And you know, I'm in a position where so I'm a main Ahri champion, Ahri player. I've mained that champion for many different years, and VT obviously played that champion on stage.
Sure.
You know, even though he had like an 11-3 KDA, I picked out like a dozen things in that game where I'm like, this has made you worse at this game. You have not snowballed well here. You have made this wrong decision. Who's telling that to the players in their professional environments? Who's actually upping this stuff? Because this kind of wraps back around into, particularly with the new items, you know, what's happening with itemizations. There's big rune changes coming up too, which are seriously going to impact the game. I know that sometimes it's only going to be a couple of percent difference.
Sure.
You're a professional player playing at the top level of your game. You should be fighting for those percentage. I'm getting, a little bit worried again, even early into the season, that we're not really fighting for those percentages. And a lot of these teams are just kind of winging it and waiting to see what they can copy from somewhere else.
I mean, you brought them up, so let's segue. Obviously, the joke is, I was going before, you notice I was obviously going like low to high to low to high. Well, no one knows what the fuck Vitality is. Because here's the joke, guys. You all already told me, like Carmine, after week 1, see, I told you this team's trash too. And then the joke is, then after that, they win all the games. So, like, look, true, strength of schedule definitely does attune how good they are. They're not actually, like, turned it all around. They played some weaker teams. But even so, the problem with this team, I feel like, is this time here. This is one of the teams where I think a lot of it is based on things like, will they have pre-existing synergies in the bot lane? Will Mac bring some effect? I think everyone's hoping the Mac effect happens. I don't know what to make of this team because they have started weaker than I thought, but I still do think, like, I mean, the joke is this team ties into everything we've talked about, mate. Like, this is a team where, like, Photon fits every convo we just had about, like, I mean, he gets the lead, he has the CS. It seems like every game he does well. They never play around him. They never give him any help. They leave him on island. He leaves the game like a solo queue game, like, shit, be nice to play 5v5. And then the rest of the team is like, sadly, the bot lane hasn't been what everyone hoped it would be. I mean, part of that's maybe meta again. When you envisioned a Hylissang Carzzy game, you weren't envisioning him on Varus. I'm hoping. Like, you were thinking of him on a fucking the Ezreal or something ridiculous like going balls deep. You weren't thinking of him kiting backwards. And then obviously, I mean, the problem with Hylissang is everyone now, they used to like let him get away with the ints. Now I feel like they overreact to the ints and make like he can't even play and we should replace him. So this team's a mixed bag. Give me your thoughts. Where is Vitality at now? Because I feel like this is also a team where if you can take whether they're going to go up or down, there could be a lot of cachet to be earned here. Where are they headed?
I think the best way I can describe this situation is like the best possible way to prove for Mac and Pad that they are the best coaches in Europe. Because like this team has so many parts going in different directions. You have, VTO has very defined strengths and weaknesses. If he needs to leave lane before one item, that's not a good thing because he won't be there. If he fights after one item and it's on even fights, he's going to be very good. Douglas, rookie jungler, lots of stuff to learn. Jungle support synergy is very important. I think the difference between week 2 and week 3, I think Mac tweeted about this too, was actually just Douglas just really honing in on what Hylissang wanted him to do. I think that's why both of them on the whole looked better. I think Photon's the one stable point of this team because you just know he's going to get value. I think he's the best individual laning top in Europe as well. This guy's incredible. He even put Adam in the dumpster as well, I'm pretty sure. He's been doing really well on the prime carry picks. It's kind of concerning that even though Rumble is getting through the draft, he can't do enough to win games because that champion is super broken for top lane carries right now. No one's letting it through because even in Europe we can carry with that pick. This team, in some ways, I'm happy to chill for winter on them and see how they develop through the year.
Okay.
But because there is just so many things pulling in different directions, particularly with a rookie jungler and a mid lane that needs to just adapt to a different style of play somehow, some way. But even then, the inconsistencies of this team are incredibly entertaining in one way, but like, how do you even predict that's going to happen?
Yes.
I think that Carzzy Hylissang teamed up with Mac and Pad gives them a bit of a platform to retain some of the communication systems you have for review in a team and then build that out. I think that's actually quite underrated, being able to have like players which already know how to communicate with the coaching staff about how you develop a team. I don't actually know whether Mac is working full-time with the team right now, because he said he couldn't be on stage because of paperwork issues or something. I don't know whether he's still working with them behind the scenes or remotely or something like that. That might have affected
Could have limited
too.
them. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But I think, I think they're starting to know thyself, or know them, whatever the correct conjugation of this. They're starting to realize when they're starting to do well after this point, which is typically, when VTO has reached that one item spike and can skirmish very well, that's typically worked well for them. I think the Akali game and the Ahri game, they snowball particularly well off of those games once VTO kind of wasn't on a champion or a draft that required him to fight before level 6 or just at the level 6 mark, and you can kind of wait a little bit beyond that point. I think to facilitate that, we've seen Douglas move a little bit away from stuff like the Xin Zhao and the Jarvan, which, even though he was doing quite well at finding the enemy jungler first and getting first bloods and stuff like that, it got a little bit directionless after that point, whereas something like a Maokai, and against the G2 game as well, he had a magnificent Maokai game in team fights. Having something like that, which the champion almost necessitates you do very little early. You can respond to things occasionally, but you're not going into the enemy jungle, besides to maybe put a sapling down or something like that. I think what Vitality are looking for is kind of what SK have done earlier than them, which is just find the style which they're most comfortable with and then play towards that identity and build out from that. It's taken them a week or two to get to that point. It wouldn't surprise me if this team kind of capped out of this for winter and they have to rebuild a little bit or like do a couple of different decisions for spring in regards to their drafts and their champion pools and stuff like that. But I mean, credit to them actually, considering you have a rookie jungler like. And Douglas, I know who's in the LEC last split as well. They're starting to get towards there, and we have seen actually when they get to occasional points. There was again the G2 game. They actually do have some pretty good potential in there.
Yeah, the problem I think with this team is if you are Douglas, you aren't just like, oh, you're a rookie jungler in the LEC. You've got one of the hardest tasks anyone can have, which is you are now intended. Remember, as much as like classically it's jungle mid, actually in the modern day of League of Legends, it's jungle support, obviously, isn't it? That's the synergy you need. And so I would just say this. God bless coming into the league as a rookie, and Hylissang is the support that you expected to synergize. Because if people don't know, I've talked to so many teammates of this guy through all of his teams, and the story basically goes like this. The best way I can explain it is like this. He is a fucking wild Mustang, and you do not tame a wild Mustang. You just have to let it be what it's going to be. So you don't tell Hylissang, like, whoa, stop, like, think. Do you go in now? Should you? If you do that, you will ruin his entire upside. What you do is, if you're going to have him in your team, you just have to commit to whatever he does. And that means sometimes you are going to absolutely, it's like the one on LEC. The joke is they were like making it palatable. Mate, it's just the truth. Like the joke is basically if he goes in, you either go in or he will die. Like the genius of it is, by the way, there's actually like a didactic element which you must learn that his style works because he will teach you very harshly that it isn't. Like it will look like he's hinting you, but he's actually just doing the play he thinks is right. So Douglas, by the way, I think, like I say, I have sympathy for him. That's going to be hard. And then the last thing I'll say is this: I also think his solo lane scenario is way more difficult than people realize. Because think about it, you have this two players where one, the Korean top laner Photon, looks really good, but I've got to just say it as an outsider, it looks like he has some sort of comms issues. Either they can't come with him or he doesn't understand what they're saying. Because even on the Vitality last year, it's the same thing would happen. He'd look great in laning phase, he'd get kills, he'd be on a carry champ, he couldn't do anything. Like he didn't know when to group, or they didn't group it, whatever it might be. So you've got a top laner that in theory, if this guy just spoke English, I would say just fucking gank top, being an old diamond procs, just gank top lane 24/7. But then my mid laner, like you're saying, has probably the most idiosyncratic carry game in all of European League of Legends, where if you get him to the right items at the right time, he looks sick in the team fight, and we did give him MVP of Europe for this reason a year ago, 2 years ago, if people remember. But the problem is, if you don't hold his hand and don't get him to that point, he can do actually nothing. Now, God bless being in a team, if I summarise now, Mira, where the support is 24/7 pulling you into crazy engages, skirmishes, kills, while both lanes are basically like permanent, like, fucking like petrol tank empty light, like, well, fuck, that's, it's getting in, I've got to take care of that at some point. So, mate, this guy's just dragged all over the map, like, and that's why if they actually get it together, I'm with you, it'll have to be coaching success. It'll have to be that Mac and Pad really are the truth, and they really can just do it with any lineup, because there's no way the players, again, this isn't a plug-and-play solo queue team where they're just playing without comms and they're going to win. Like, if they're going to win more games, they must have found a system.
So academically, this team is going to be fascinating to see how they develop. Really, I think, are they actually going to be successful? That's almost secondary.
Yes,
I think if you're Photon or Kazi Hylissang, maybe you feel a bit bad about this lineup because actually you could be on a better lineup and maybe you could be competing for higher finishing spots and stuff like that. But like as a whole product, as a fan of professional League of Legends, I kind of want to see what you can do with this. Very rarely do you see this kind of team work out. And yeah, we know we've seen this team beat G2. We've seen them have some okay games. There's a likelihood at this point now that they do qualify for the knockout stage as well. So, I'm interested to see how they do in a best of as well against teams that might smash them in the first game. But yeah, you've got a very unique blend of things here, which is why I almost don't care how they do in Winter, because this needs a bit of time. That's another thing which is a little bit hard to kind of encapsulate in European and Western League of Legends too, is that a lot of the time, orgs want instant success when actually you need a full year to really get things going. I think, you look at, I think Peter Dunn teams have been like this in the past, where actually sometimes you need a bit of time to get a roster up and running because you're getting certain people involved, you're growing people into the right position. I think Mac and Pad, Peter Dunn obviously did this very well with the Mad Lions' real golden era success.
Yes.
I'm just really wondering how much time Vitality is willing to give this, because, I'm interested to see where it goes, and I'm interested to see at what point the coaching staff think there is a route to success or whether that's been capped off. Because, Mac and Pad had a similar issue with the Rika lineup of Mad Lions in 22 spring, and that obviously didn't work out. Changed it to Nisqy, actually did pretty well with that point. Are they going to have to make a single change? And if so, who is that going to be? Is it going to be someone like VTO out of mid lane so it can facilitate Douglas? Is it going to be the other way around? You're going to get a jungler that can facilitate the solo lanes a bit more. But yeah, I think all of these considered, this is a bigger picture of why they are so on and off, because you are just rolling dice a lot of the times on how you can get this team to appear on the Rift. I think there are some routes to success where you can just have Douglas on something which kind of just maintains things early. You get to one item on your solo lanes and you hope that laning phase is going to go well. You turn up to team fights at that point and you hope that the individual power of your solo laners, once they have items, comes through.
The basic thing I would just say is this. The other reason why it's not as simple with this line, like the Yamato example I gave, we don't actually know, did Yamato ask these players? I don't think it's actually ever been made public, whether it was the GM who did it, right? So I can't blame him if it ends up he was given the wrong tools. He can't make it work. The reason why this won't fly for Mac is, one, you got the same bot lane bro. And then secondly, there was like a little speed dial guy called Peter Dunn. You could have called about Vethio. He did just work in the line. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have known who these players are. Come on. So that one, I feel like you walked into that one with your eyes open. So I'm with you. Let's just see the power of these coaching staff approaches and whether it is possible to really level the team up. Right? If we flip over, let's talk about Mad Lions. Because here's what's funny. This is an example of where, even though everyone else fucking butchers it, right, I'm actually going to use this quote correctly from the movie Django Unchained, Nymeria. You know the meme quote? It actually applies to this team, right? The problem I have with this team is because it used to be a contender and had a really, really top players, and then it looked like they've built an incredibly cynical budget roster just around Spanish national identity, quite frankly, to save money as far as I'm concerned, as well as that. That's just the clever, like, political expedient tool to use to pretend like that's why you did it. I think, right, they're going to be a bottom team, so they're not going to win any game. In fact, this is going to be shit. It's going to ruin the LEC, right? That I was wrong on that, but I'm still not at all hyped. So I would use the quote now. Like, you currently have my curiosity, but you don't have my attention yet. That's how I will paraphrase the quote. Because the real problem is this. I'm not going to now go because they won those first games. Wow, now they are awesome. Like, they're still clearly not going to be a team that does anything in the playoffs, in my opinion. Like, there's not going to be a team that, if you get a best of 5, they're not going to fucking win big series. They're not going to beat the top teams. I actually think even player strength is going to kick in eventually. But I'll give them credit. They looked way better starting than I thought they would. Some of those ideas of, like, pre-existing, maybe there's something to that, because I'll tell you what, some of these players, I can tell with my eyes, they're not really top players, but they're functional. Their fucking team works. And again, I'll make it the opposite. They actually are in some ways the opposite of Karmine Corp. Tell you what, if your team can actually have lesser players but close the game, now you have some respect. I'll give you some respect for that. Like, I do think closing the game is underrated in competitive leagues. People don't realise that's the area when you're playing solo queue. It is radically different to a team game. Everyone knows in solo queue you can be up in lane, but your team doesn't know when to group, when to fight, what objective. At the pro level, when you have these advantages in these games, you're supposed to know how to pilot it. And quite frankly, even if they're rookies, man, this team actually is not as bad as I thought. Like, there's something to this team.
I think the point about closing games really exposes when people started watching League of Legends. If you started watching League in early years, hell, I mean, I'd even say, as long as you started watching like 2016, 2017, you saw slow League of Legends. You saw League of Legends where it wasn't about a Dragon Soul win condition as it is nowadays. You had to play through intricate split pushing or well set up team fights and things like that. it's a lot easier to close games nowadays than it used to be. It used to be the sign of a truly good team when you could take a single fight and win a game. And that's how Koreans used to win the game. Yes. That was just, you could be ahead, you'd lose one fight, and you'd lose the game because they had set up the map in advance so they could win that. So yeah, I think closing the game right now, in some ways, you know, I mean, it's still a good indicator of whether teams are actually good. And we've seen some teams, I mean, the Vitality Karmine Corp game, oh my god, I never want to see that again. Hell, I mean, even LPL had some issues with that with the RNG EDG series that we saw, games 2 and 3 of that. Big lead, couldn't close. There were some issues there which I'll now have to track for those teams going forward. I think the big thing that Mad Koi have going for them and how they can get ahead of games and start get themselves into game-winning positions as well is they've kept a core of an ERL team which had a very specific identity, kept it together, plugged and played Elyoya, one of the best jungles in Europe, and then slotted them into that style. You have Melzet, Alvaro Super, and then Frescovi from Movistar Riders, which reached the finals of EMEA Masters. And you have Mirwin as well. He's another LVP player, and that dude's just got a weird champion pool. I love that guy. I was a little bit worried he would get blasted. Yeah, I would tune into games just to see what he does, even if it's kind of like not the best technically. Like, yeah, I want to see like a AD RE top lane. That'll be weird, sure. And, you know, I think that keeping together a team with a big identity, we've seen that work out for Mad Koi. We've also seen it work out for SK for a certain extent too. We talked about that a little bit earlier. As long as you can create towards a certain identity, it means you can really funnel your efforts into playing that style. From what I've heard from Movistar Riders, Alvaro is a very talented player at shot calling early game, which is part of how they managed to keep that style, because Melzet's are very good at kind of communicating to Alvaro what he wants onto the Rift before a game, and then also he then applies it in game. I'm quite surprised that Elyoya has managed to slot into that well, because typically he was the player who really did everything that he wanted.
Yes.
You know, when I think of Mad Lions before, I think of, well, this is Elyoya's team. He's going to do what he wants to do. And typically that is he gets into the enemy jungle. He gets a farm lead through enemy camps. Even if he's not on a carry jungler, he will make sure that gold is put into a good place and he will get good value with it. Even if he was on something like Trundle, he'd have fantastic games like that. But now effectively they've transferred the style to more about how can we get Super into a position where he can become a fountain laser in carry games. I think when Super is ahead on a good carry, like the Aphelios, I think he's actually had some very good Aphelios games. The team is very good at team fighting around him. We have seen a couple of games where that stalled out early. There was the one game where they were playing the Kalista Renata, which is, again, the epitome of you rule early game, you win the first wave kind of priority, you stack up a wave and you go for a dive. I can't remember exactly which game it was, but they had the Rel jungle. They called it in for a 3 versus 2 dive. They absolutely mess it up, and they lose the bot lane early game really, really hard. So there have been sometimes they've committed towards this style, and they haven't been as precise as teams which we now see above them in the standings. But even then, the degree of success that we have seen from them, given that a lot of these players were maybe a bit more shaky on paper, and you've got a lot of ERL talent which haven't proven themselves just yet, committing to that style has actually worked out pretty well for them. That's been a pretty consistent trend in the LEC, actually. If you stick to a style which your players played at the previous level of play that they did, obviously they're going to be more comfortable on the big stage. And the big bonus to that is actually Elyoya has bought into that. That was one of the worries I had, is like, well, are they just going to be kind of like punched into a mold by Elyoya, just trying to say, look, you're playing my style now. But no, he's gone along with it very well, and I think this team has had some very, very entertaining games nonetheless.
Right, obviously, there's one team left, and it is Heretics, which is funny because actually Heretics, because of having people like Perks, Wonder, big, massive personalities, I actually think a lot of people were primed to give them the KC treatment and be hating on them like a motherfucker. Problem is, you can't, because they're actually good. Like, the joke is, this actually is sort of what people hoped of when they saw this team. Like, it's kind of all working out like you'd hope so far. I even get the sense, this is one thing I do love about roster construction, Nymera, is when as an outsider, you can sort of intuit what you're going for, and then you find out like they agree and they've done it as well. Like the joke is, I can even tell everyone, including Flackhead, knows his job in this team is like essentially best case scenario, you're praying Gorilla and your job is to let Smeb carry the game, as it were, in Wonder. Like, that's just clearly how they set this up. Like, this really is, it's not just like on paper a reunion of G2 2018 topside. They've clearly intentionally made the team that way, and that's why they've made it and why they've recruited these people. I'll even throw this out there. Anyone who's seen the career of Flackhead knows he plays 1 billion games of Aphelios. Never played it so far. They're not even giving him it. There's not going to be a comp where he's Gala on Aphelios and everyone plays around. They gave him one fucking Lucian game and one like Draven game, but aside from that's right. You are on Seraphine. You are going to be on the fucking. You're just going to be on the basic champions, mate. That is your job, and don't worry, we're all here for that. Your job is basically you are Alfred to Batman. Your job is to give the top side what they need to carry the game, and when they do, I can't lie, I actually like this, mate. This team's a fun team to watch, not just because it's actually a good team.
Yeah, they were much better than I expected. I had worries that there wasn't going to be someone to put their hand up and say, I'm getting resources. I think that I also had worries about how Kaiser was playing because...
Oh, sure.
The way that I watched Kaiser ever since he left Mad Lions, I just thought this dude was... I was surprised he was still in LEC. Yeah. This guy was really poor. For those of you that don't know the kind of like the overall landscape of supports in Europe as well, there is a particular phenomenon where basically supports don't speak in Europe. They're all very soft-spoken. Trimby's maybe one of the loudest ones, but even then, he's had to learn how to become more effective in his communication because there's a difference between shouting stuff at your teammates and like giving the right information at the right times. Comms is woeful for supports in Europe for the most part.
By the way, across the board, like the two craziest oons are Hylissang and Mikyx supposedly barely talk, even though they're making crazy plays all the time that you'd want loads of comms from potentially. Yeah, exactly.
And especially as a support where, you know, a lot of what we've talked to on the show is about jungle support and how important that is strategically in bigger map senses as well. You know, maybe this does play into how you play around top lane because actually jungle support are meant to set up the map for how they play around. This all is interconnected. And part of it does come from supports not really being as strategic thinking as they potentially could be. And one of the things that we heard about the Mad Lions team, again, like the one which won the championships, was Kazi was the one who was really piloting Kaiser for the laning phase, and then Alroya just kind of took over what he needed from him in terms of resets in the map, kind of thing like that. So actually, in terms of communication of him, when he looked at his best, most of that was handled by his teammates. Now you come into a team with, you know, with Flakked, who's done actually a really good job in the last year, I think, beyond what I thought of him at that point. I was still worried about how he'd play in laning phase because there's some just individual stuff which was just, again, nigh unforgivable, really, in his last couple of teams as well. I think the big thing is adding Perkz onto this team because Perkz has been the European strategist. I think even regardless of where he's been, he has tried to do the strategy side of things. I think early last year when Jankos was on Heretics with the previous roster, one of the things, if you go, there were some great vlogs actually about how I think it's the Heretics Passion series or something like that, where they have a lot of talks quite down to earth about what they need from the players. Jankos wasn't the strategist on most of his previous teams. Like, he would talk about what he needed from, like, a certain jungle path and, like, how he'd make a certain play. But it wasn't really a plan in the next 3 to 5 minutes or something like that. It was more about the next minute, what's going to happen there. Yes. I get the feeling like Perkz was the person who would really supplement that. And now suddenly you have actually a pretty good mix of personalities to cover, again, maybe what Kaiser lacked in previous teams in regards to what's happening in the next minute, what's happening in the next 3 to 5 minutes as well. And I don't think I respected that enough pre-split to understand how Heretics would be playing. Actually, they've done quite well with that. And even though I don't think that last year many of these players were prime carries who would always get all the resources, they're actually getting a lot of value elsewhere. I think that Perkz is getting a lot of value actually out of mid lane, and now it's gone back to, God, it's an awful mid lane meta, but the Corki Azir stuff, he's actually doing really well at. And if it's working, of course he's going to keep playing it. They're doing a lot better than I thought they would. Of course, they had the one game versus Mad Koi, which was absolutely awful, where they fought it around that blue buff when they should never be fighting before one item. So there were like some slip-ups. But yeah, you know, I'm actually excited for this team now. I don't think I was before, but I am now. On a historical level I was, but I am now, actually. They look like they're a thinking person's team. And I'm interested to see how far that carries them. And particularly when it gets into best ofs, there are a few teams I think which will have the skill sets, like compared to this, to walk away from a game which doesn't go well and say, okay, here's how we approach it for the next game.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's also, I think, the really underestimated part about the top side. People think when they hear someone like me is hyped that I'm saying they're just going to play like 2018 GT. Like, look, obviously not, some of these players aren't in that form or they're not relative to their competition as good. No. The thing that excites me is these players, I mean, obviously later when they did the role sort of Perkz as well, just have shown a fantastic ability to synergize together with their strengths. Like you're saying, like Perkz is one of the best sort of like macro leaders in Europe I've heard from so many of his teammates. communicates and gives the right calls and the decisive calls and doesn't just do that thing of like, can we do this? He's the guy who tells us do this now and then we go do it. Then, like you say with Jankos, basically the thing about Jankos' game is he's probably the best cover jungler. I mean, he might be one of the best I've ever seen in League of Legends history. He's fucking unbelievable at putting out a fire before it becomes a fire. Like, he sees it when it's just a little match. He douses it immediately. Like, he's insane at that. So already, by the way, that's why I wasn't worried like past years about like, but what about the Perkz laning phase? Like, mate, we've got the guy that can fix that, and they've already played together a fucking gang of times. And then on the Wunder one, the best part is he's now got the people who've already played with him and enabled him top, but also because of these other years, if he needs to for a comp or a game, like you say, like in a series, it's just not going well in bot lane, he can just do the weak side and then let bot lane get the attention and have the ganks and get covered if necessary. And then lastly, who's the coach? Probably one of the best fucking actual out of the game intangible coaches Europe's ever had. So I actually think this looks great, this setup.
So in regards to Peter Dunne as well, for those of you that don't know like what his role is in a lot of teams, he doesn't know that much about the game.
Oh, he doesn't pretend to either, by the way.
And he doesn't pretend to, and that's completely fine because he is very, very good at making sure people use their own skills to better themselves. And that's like, there are very different ways to coach, but I think, as a coach, you're not like a player on the Rift where you have to be the only person in that seat at the time. As a coach, part of the skills is knowing who can supplement you doing your job. As long as you can facilitate the right kind of growth and the right kind of like learning, and also maintain the respect for the players to get the most out of that, like, you're doing a good job. And when you have players like this, it was always the case of, Grabs and Dylan Falco of the G2 lineups, typically their job is mainly letting the players use their own skills in the most constructive ways. So yeah, I'm very excited to see what Peter Dunne does with this. I was worried about some of these players. I thought, maybe it's gonna get to a point where, you need Flakked to carry, but he's in lane with a guy that's not good in lane. What's gonna happen if Perkz doesn't find a good champion pool and he's gonna get shut down early? What happens if we have carry top meta? Well, one does not really be going towards that. Luckily, all that's worked out. So they've got enough wins to, get into the next stage. Probably, it's very likely that I think they're very likely to get into this point.
Almost certainly are,
wins. So and they're gonna get through the best of 3 play, which I think I'm gonna be very excited for compared to a lot of other teams. This team has got a lot more stuff than I had hoped for at the start of the split. I think I initially had them like 6th or something. So I'm afraid about who the prime carry is. They have problem solved that actually, so I'm gonna take the L on that one. They've done well.
Yes. No, I'm with you. I actually do think this was one of the more, like, I understand people who think, well, I'm not getting tricked by Perkz again. But that was Perkz without Jankos, though, guys. That's the fact that you got a shade in here. And lastly, I'll give you another reason why it would actually be, this is why, if you notice in all my off-season content, I went out of my way to stress that the story, it's true, by the way, that Perkz took a way lower salary than he used to be on in Vitality. The reason I stressed that is, the other thing you could be scared about if you just saw the lineup on paper is it really like, fuck it, well, we're not winning any of us anyway, so let's just get all together in a team and fuck off and be dickheads and, fucking played like a meme game. If they'd have done that, it'd be a bummer if it was like a meme retirement home. They seem like they actually think they're going to be good guys. Like, they even seemed pissed after that G2 game that it wasn't competitive. Like, I think they really thought they were going to mix it up and like, if Rogue can beat and we can beat. I think they thought they were going to be at the top of the league. That's a pretty promising sign mentality-wise for me.
Especially from this point in the roster's history too, because I think, we had, after one of the Worlds or something like that, we saw that, the G2 lineups kind of like lose motivation. They lost the hunger. They've been together as the same group of people for a very long time. And maybe things plateaued at this point. I know that we've got returning members, but it's been a while since they've been there. For this kind of part of the life cycle of a team, which, eventually they all reach a point where probably they have to move on because of X factors or whatever.
Yes.
Like, this is not a bad starting point, actually.
No, I mean, everyone has to remember, except for Jankos, who was on the G2 2022, the rest of them, it's been a while since they won a championship, guys. And I can tell you, Wunder isn't lying in my interview with him. He's really motivated to win again because he knows that, like, eventually you're going to get to the point where, like, half the people who are your peers in the league are like, well, I wasn't even here when you won, so were you ever that good? Those guys hate that, mate. They want to still have this. Yeah. They at least want to believe they can still be the best, even if they aren't the best. By the way, at the end of this episode, when we said everything, I normally would just abruptly cut the video, but Dom told me when we did a live stream, I had to say something at the end as an outro, so that's the end of the episode.